My name is Alina Smith. I am 30 years old, and on the day I realized my parents were bankrupting themselves to fund my brother's lies, I was sitting at their kitchen table listening to my mother cry over the price of store-bought cookies. She told me they had nothing left for my wedding, not a single dollar. But 20 minutes later, while sorting their mail, I found a bank statement on the counter, a wire transfer, $40,000 sent to my brother Daniel. And right there on the memo line, printed in black ink, were the words that changed how I saw my family forever. Do not tell your sister. What I did with that piece of paper and how I used my own brother's arrogance to tear down his fake empire in front of 200 of the richest people in Texas is the story I am about to tell you. Before I do, take a moment to like and subscribe to Linda Vengeance, but only if you think this story earns it. Drop your age and your city in the comments below. I want to know who is listening out there. Now let me take you back to a sticky Tuesday afternoon in early May, the day I stopped being the backup child. The air conditioner in my parents' Dallas suburb home was broken. Again. The ceiling fan pushed warm, stale air around the kitchen, carrying the faint smell of old coffee grounds and lemon dish soap. I sat across from my mother, Patricia, at the same vinyl-covered table where I used to do my high school calculus homework. Between us sat a plastic tray of generic brand shortbread cookies. The edges of the cookies were crumbling, leaving a dusty ring of crumbs on the table. Patricia traced the rim of her chipped ceramic mug with a pale finger. Her shoulders slumped under her floral blouse. She looked tired, the kind of deep, bone-weary exhaustion that made you want to wrap a blanket around her. She sighed, her eyes welling up with tears that never quite spilled over. I just do not know where the money goes anymore, Alina. She shook her head, staring at the crumbs. Your father's pension adjuster sent another letter yesterday. They are trimming his distributions again next quarter. Gas is up. Groceries are out of reach. I went to buy your father his favorite coffee beans this morning, and I had to put them back on the shelf. I looked at the cheap cookies. They felt like a silent accusation. I had driven over on my lunch break to help sort their quarterly tax receipts. As an operations manager for a logistics firm, spreadsheets and budgets were my daily language. I took over their paperwork years ago, and my father, Richard, started complaining about the complexity of the forms. But I brought an ulterior motive today. My fiancé, Liam, and I had just reviewed the catering estimates for our upcoming wedding. We were short. Not by much, just enough to sting. I had practiced the speech in the rearview mirror on the drive over. Mom, Dad, could you help cover the appetizers? Just $2,000. Now the words tasted like ash in my mouth. I understand, Mom. I pulled a stack of tax forms from a manila envelope, keeping my eyes on the paperwork. You guys need to prioritize your fixed expenses. Liam and I will figure out the reception. We can trim the guest list. Patricia reached across the table, placing her warm hand over mine. You always were the practical one. She smiled, a frail, trembling expression. You know we would give you the world if we had it. It just breaks my heart that we have nothing left to give our only daughter for her special day. Guilt settled right behind my ribs, a familiar, heavy ache. I was the independent child, the one who earned an academic scholarship, budgeted her salary to the penny, and never asked for a safety net. My older brother Daniel was the visionary. He lived in Austin, drove a sleek imported car, and talked a big game about his tech startup. I was expected to be the stable foundation, the one who required no maintenance. Asking them for appetizer money felt like a breach of my own protocol. Do not worry about it. Really, I murmured, organizing the receipts into neat chronological piles. Let me get that coffee pot out of the sink, Patricia said, pushing back her chair. The legs scraped against the worn linoleum floor. I think your father left a shoebox of old medical receipts in the den. I will be right back. Her footsteps faded down the hallway. I stretched my neck, rolling my shoulders to release the knot of tension forming at the base of my skull. I reached for the next stack of paper on the counter, a messy pile of unopened mail Richard had tossed near the ceramic fruit bowl. A thick envelope from Chase Bank sat on top, the flap already sliced open with a letter opener. I slipped the pages out, intending to file them in the deductions folder. It was a standard checking account ledger. I saw routine deposits, grocery store charges, pharmacy copays, normal everyday expenses for a retired couple trying to make ends meet. Then my eyes caught a line item on the second page. The font was black uniform and undeniable. Outgoing wire transfer. Amount, $40,000. Recipient, Daniel Smith. My breath hitched. I traced the line with my fingernail, expecting the ink to smudge, expecting it to be a bank error or a glaring typo. $40,000. The sum eclipsed my entire wedding budget, twice over. I shifted my gaze to the next column, the memo field. Do not tell your sister. The kitchen felt suddenly freezing. The hum of the refrigerator amplified in my ears, drowning out the distant sound of the television playing in the den. I read the line again, then a third time. The words locked into a rigid, logical sequence in my brain. The supposed pension cuts, the generic cookies, the tearful speech about having empty pockets and putting coffee beans back on the shelf. It was not a lack of funds. It was a choice. The guilt behind my ribs dissolved instantly. It was replaced by a sharp, clinical clarity. My operations training kicked in, the ingrained instinct to assess the damage, document the variables, and analyze the system failure. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. I laid the bank statement flat against the sticky vinyl tablecloth, smoothing out the creases. The camera clicked. Page 1. I flipped the paper. The camera clicked again. Page 2. I zoomed in on the memo line. A final click. I slid the pages back into the envelope, placed it exactly where I found it, next to the fruit bowl, and slipped my phone back into my pocket just as the floorboards creaked in the hallway. Found them, Patricia announced, dropping a dusty shoebox on the table. She looked at me, her expression shifting back into that mask of maternal exhaustion. Are you okay, sweetheart? You look a little pale. I looked at my mother, the woman who just 20 minutes ago patted my hand and lamented her empty pockets while $40,000 sat in her golden child's bank account. I am fine, Mom. I kept my voice even, devoid of any tremor. Just thinking about the guest list, trying to trim the fat. An hour later, I sat in my car in the driveway, the engine turned off. The Texas sun beat down on the windshield, turning the interior into an oven, but I did not roll down the windows. I needed the quiet. I opened the photo gallery on my phone. I zoomed in on the transaction. It was damning enough on its own. But as my eyes scanned the rest of the digitized ledger, a pattern emerged in the columns below. It was not just a one-time wire transfer. 3 lines down, I saw a recurring monthly deduction. Auto draft, $2,500. Payee, Austin Venture, LLC. I frowned, wiping a drop of sweat from my temple. Austin Venture, LLC. Daniel had casually mentioned that name during Christmas dinner. It was the tech startup he launched in Austin, the one he claimed had generated impressive seed funding from independent investors. He had spent the entire holiday boasting about his success, while I quietly washed the dishes in the kitchen. Why was my brother's highly successful tech company automatically drawing $2,500 from my parents' checking account every single month? I stared at the glowing screen. The $40,000 was the initial shock, but the monthly draft was the bleeding wound. Daniel was not just receiving a generous gift, he was siphoning their accounts dry. And Richard and Patricia were hiding it, weaponizing their fake poverty to manipulate me into paying for my own milestones while they bankrolled his illusions. I started the engine. I was not going to cry. Crying was a reaction, and I was a strategist. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to audit the entire system, find every single leak, and dismantle the broken machinery piece by piece. My apartment was a study in functional minimalism. The desk in the corner held dual monitors, a mechanical keyboard, and a stack of logistics manifests. This was where I optimized freight routes for a living, finding inefficiencies in supply chains and sealing the leaks. Monday evening, I applied those exact skills to my own bloodline. The cold blue light of the monitor washed over my face as I navigated the Texas Secretary of State Public Records database. My fingers hovered over the keys. I typed in Austin Venture, LLC, and hit Enter. The system generated a formal business entity report. Registered agent Daniel Smith. Filing date 18 months prior. I clicked over to the state comptroller portal to pull the public franchise tax information. The loading icon spun for 2 seconds before delivering the truth in stark black text. Gross revenue, 0. Total tax liability, 0. The company had no registered payroll, no listed assets, and no reported income. Yet the primary business address was not a residential garage or a cheap suburban co-working space. It was a premium commercial suite on Congress Avenue in downtown Austin. That zip code commanded top-tier rates. A lease in that building cost at least $8,000 a month. The math formed a jagged picture in my mind. The $40,000 wire transfer, the recurring monthly auto draft of $2,500. My brother was not running a tech startup. He was running a bonfire, and my parents were supplying the wood. Liam walked into the home office, setting a mug of green tea on my desk. He leaned over my shoulder, his eyes scanning the stark zeros on the tax report. I did not need to explain. We had spent the entire weekend processing the betrayal. I opened a new browser tab and loaded Instagram, typing in the username of my sister-in-law. Vanessa maintained a highly curated feed, a digital museum of leisure and high society aspirations. Her latest post, uploaded just hours after my mother cried over the price of coffee beans, dominated the screen. The photo featured Vanessa lounging on a poolside sunbed. She wore an oversized woven straw hat and mirrored designer sunglasses. Her left wrist was angled perfectly to catch the afternoon light, showcasing a new piece of jewelry. I recognized the distinct square face and linked bracelet immediately, a Cartier Panthère, yellow gold and stainless steel. Retail price, $12,000. The caption beneath the photo read, "Blessed beyond measure, an early anniversary gift from the best CEO husband." I stared at the gleaming gold links on the screen. The image superimposed itself over the memory of the crumbling, generic shortbread cookies sitting on the sticky vinyl tablecloth. My mother was trimming coupons, while Vanessa wore the equivalent of a down payment on her wrist. A tight, hot knot formed in the center of my chest. Liam placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his silence offering more support than 1,000 words of false comfort. 6 days later, the family gathered for Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Dallas. The air inside the dining room was thick with the smell of roasted lamb and an unspoken, suffocating tension. Daniel and Vanessa had driven up from Austin for the weekend. Daniel sat across from me wearing a crisp linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing a sleek smartwatch. Vanessa sat beside him, the Cartier watch clinking softly against the stem of her wineglass every time she took a sip. Patricia hovered around them like an anxious servant. Her previous exhaustion had vanished, replaced by a frantic energy as she offered Daniel extra portions of meat and refilled Vanessa's glass before it was even half empty. Richard sat at the head of the table, carving his food with mechanical, deliberate precision. He poured himself a second glass of scotch before the meal was 10 minutes old. He kept his eyes averted, staring into his glass, as if the amber liquid held the answers to a test he had already failed. Daniel dominated the airspace. He threw around corporate buzzwords like confetti. He talked about disrupting the market, creating synergy, and closing an upcoming seed round with anonymous angel investors. Patricia nodded along eagerly, her eyes shining with a misplaced, desperate pride. Growing up, Daniel was the charismatic rule breaker, the boy who shattered windows and charmed his way out of the consequences. I was the quiet honor student who brought the broom and swept up the glass. Nothing had changed. The dynamic simply carried a higher price tag now. Liam squeezed my knee under the table, a steady, grounding pressure. Patricia turned her attention toward me, slicing through Daniel's monologue. "How is the wedding planning coming along, Alina? Did you manage to book that floral designer you liked?" I set my fork down, resting my hands in my lap so no one could see my fingers trembling. We are still looking. The quotes came back higher than our estimates. We might pivot to simple greenery and candlelight to stay within our budget. Daniel leaned back in his mahogany chair, swirling the red wine in his glass. He looked at me with an expression of practiced pity. You have to be smart about these things, Allie. He used the childhood nickname he knew I despised. A wedding is a depreciating asset. You and Liam really need to learn how to live within your means. Do not stretch yourselves thin for one party. You do not want to start your marriage in debt. He took a slow sip of his wine before delivering the final blow. Look at Vanessa and me. We waited until the company secured its initial funding before we upgraded our lifestyle. We made sacrifices. Fiscal responsibility is the only way to build real wealth. You cannot just rely on handouts. The hypocrisy hit me like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. I looked at the $12,000 watch sparkling on Vanessa's wrist. I looked at my father, who took a long, slow swallow of his scotch, refusing to meet my gaze. I looked at my mother, who was nodding in fervent, genuine agreement with Daniel's lecture on fiscal responsibility. I bit the inside of my cheek. The metallic taste of copper flooded my mouth. The disciplined operations manager inside my head stepped forward, forcing the betrayed daughter into the background. I smiled. A tight, polite, chilling smile. You are right, Daniel. Fiscal responsibility is everything. The drive back to our apartment was silent. The streetlights of the Dallas tollway flashed rhythmically across the windshield, casting long, moving shadows inside the car. My mind churned, calculating timelines, connecting the bank statements to the lease agreements, building a mental fortress of evidence. Liam sat in the passenger seat, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his phone screen. He had been quiet since we left the house, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Alina," he said. His voice was low, laced with a strange urgency. I kept my eyes focused on the lane markers ahead. "What is it?" Liam unbuckled his seatbelt, leaning across the center console to hold the phone in my peripheral vision. It was Vanessa's Instagram post from Friday, the picture of her lounging by the pool in her oversized designer sunglasses. I was just looking at the glare on the lenses, he explained. Liam pinched the screen with 2 fingers, magnifying the curved, mirrored reflection of the sunglasses until the pixels blurred into sharp focus. "Look at the background." I glanced over at the glowing screen. Reflected clearly in the mirrored lenses was a wide, paved driveway leading up to a modern stucco house. And parked squarely in the center of that driveway was a silver Lexus RX, equipped with a custom black roof rack. It was my father's car, a highly specific, undeniable match. Liam lowered the phone, his eyes meeting mine in the dark cabin of the car. "Your dad told us he was playing in a golf tournament in Fort Worth all weekend. Why is his car parked in Daniel's driveway in Austin?" Wednesday morning brought a different kind of storm to my logistics desk. The sky outside my glass-walled office was a bright, unforgiving blue. I sat staring at dual monitors routing freight schedules for a fleet of 18-wheelers moving across the Texas Panhandle. The work required intense focus. I needed to identify supply chain bottlenecks and eliminate them. My personal cell phone vibrated against the polished mahogany wood, jarring me out of a complex spreadsheet. The caller identification displayed the name of my wedding floral designer. Celine Botanicals was a premier studio in the heart of the city. Booking her services required a signed contract 12 months in advance and a non-refundable 50% deposit. Her designs featured imported white ranunculus and blue thistle. She was the one true luxury Liam and I allowed in our strict budget. I picked up the phone, expecting a routine question about the table centerpieces. Instead, her voice sounded clipped. The usual warmth of her customer service persona was gone, replaced by a sterile, rehearsed tone. She informed me she had to terminate our agreement. A sudden, high-profile corporate booking had monopolized her entire staff for my exact wedding weekend. Before I could process the shock, Celine offered a rigid apology and promised a full refund. She cited a loophole in our contract regarding unforeseen schedule conflicts. She hung up before I could formulate a single question. A digital chime sounded on my computer 3 seconds later. An automatic bank deposit notification appeared on my screen. The money was already back in my checking account. I stared at the blinking cursor on my logistics spreadsheet. The foundation of my event was crumbling. Replacing a high-end floral designer 4 months before a wedding was a logistical nightmare. All the reputable studios would be booked. I needed a sounding board. I dialed my parents' house line, hoping for a sliver of maternal comfort to ground me. Patricia answered on the 4th ring. She sounded breathless. The distinct rustle of tissue paper and shopping bags echoed in the background. I explained the situation with the cancellation. I outlined the timeline crunch and the stress of losing a major vendor. I expected outrage on my behalf. I expected her to share my frustration. Instead, Patricia offered a distracted hum. "That is a shame, Alina," she said, "but maybe it is a blessing in disguise. You were spending far too much on those arrangements anyway. Just grab some silk flowers from the craft store. No one will notice the difference." My fingernails pressed hard into my palms, leaving crescent-shaped indents in my skin. Silk flowers. Just days ago, she told me I was stretching myself thin and acting irresponsible with money. Now she was treating my ruined contract like a convenient coupon savings. "I am a little overwhelmed, Mom. I could really use some help researching new vendors this weekend. Even just someone to make a few phone calls." Patricia sighed, a long, dramatic sound. "I cannot do it this weekend, sweetheart. I am swamped trying to find a new evening gown. Daniel and Vanessa are hosting a charity gala for his startup on your wedding weekend. They are expecting local politicians and major tech investors. It is a very exclusive black tie event down in Austin. I need to look the part. You know how important presentation is to your brother." The air in my office turned frigid. The hairs on my arms stood up. My wedding weekend, an elite corporate event, a sudden high-profile booking. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening crunch. I ended the call quickly, offering a hollow excuse about an incoming freight delay. I placed my phone face down on the desk. I closed my eyes. My memory rewound to a family dinner 3 weeks prior. Vanessa had wandered into my bedroom while I was pouring drinks in the kitchen. I walked in to find her standing over my desk, flipping slowly through my open wedding planning binder. She had smiled a sugary, hollow smile, claiming she was just admiring my color palette. My signed contract with Celine Botanicals sat right on top of the page. It displayed the dates, the specific floral choices, the prices, and the direct contact information. I opened a new browser tab. I navigated to the Floral Studios business page and pulled up their upcoming travel schedule. There it was, a glossy promotional graphic announcing a special weekend installation in Austin for an elite corporate client. Vanessa did not just hire a random event designer. She stole mine. She targeted the specific vendor I spent months researching. She used the stolen $40,000 from my parents to offer the studio a buyout so large the designer was willing to break a signed contract and travel 3 hours south. This was not a mere coincidence. It was calculated, strategic, psychological warfare. Vanessa wanted to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. She wanted to prove she could buy the infrastructure of my life on a whim, using the very funds my parents claimed did not exist. When I got home that evening, the shadows in my apartment felt heavy. Liam found me sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by printed spreadsheets, budget notes, and vendor contracts. He set his briefcase down and took off his suit jacket. I laid out the facts. I told him about the phone call with the florist, the conversation with my mother, and the timeline of Vanessa's intrusion into my bedroom. Liam sat beside me on the carpet. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He reached over and took the printed vendor list out of my hands. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "We do not have to do this, Alina," he said. His voice was steady, but edged with a quiet, burning anger. "We can walk away right now. Let us cancel the venue. We can go to the county courthouse tomorrow morning. Just you and me. We can elope. We do not need their validation. We do not need a party that your family is actively trying to sabotage." I looked at Liam. His offer was tempting, a clean escape, a way to cut the cord and walk out of the arena. But the operations manager inside my head recognized a retreat. Eloping would mean Vanessa won. It would mean she successfully bullied me out of my own celebration using stolen money. It would mean my parents got exactly what they wanted, an excuse to avoid contributing while maintaining their facade of financial hardship. They would play the victims, telling everyone I eloped because I was difficult. "This is not about the flowers, Liam," I whispered. I kept my voice low, anchoring myself to the reality of the situation. It is about the power dynamic. If we elope, we let them operate in the dark. We let them think they can drain my family dry and use the spoils to humiliate me. I am not running away. I am going to shine a floodlight on the entire operation. Liam nodded slowly. He understood the mechanics of my mind better than anyone. He leaned forward to kiss my forehead, sealing our silent pact. We were going to war. Just as he pulled back, the screen of my laptop illuminated the dark living room. An incoming email notification slid across the top right corner of the display, cutting through the silence. The sender was the Dallas County Clerk Automated Registry. 5 years ago, when Richard first started complaining about his failing memory and misplaced tax forms, I had set up a digital property fraud alert on my parents' house. It was a simple precaution meant to protect 2 aging people from title theft. I had forgotten the alert even existed. I dragged the cursor over and clicked the notification. The email body was brief, sterile, and bureaucratic. It confirmed a new legal filing recorded against the deed of the property where I grew up. My heart hammered against my ribs, a fast, rhythmic thumping. I read the legal text twice to ensure I was translating the dense jargon correctly. A financial institution was claiming a legal right to the property due to an unpaid debt. My parents did not just have empty pockets. They had a lien on their house. They had mortgaged their own walls to keep my brother's lies afloat. The email from the county registry sat in my inbox like an unexploded bomb. I clicked the secure link, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. The portal required a nominal fee to view the public property records. I typed my credit card number into the payment gateway, my eyes fixed on the processing icon. Liam leaned closer, the warmth of his shoulder pressing against mine in the dark living room. The document loaded on the screen. It was a dense, multi-page legal filing. The header displayed the address of the suburban split-level home where I grew up. The house my father spent 3 decades paying off with his salary. It was supposed to be their untouchable asset, their ultimate safety net for retirement. I scrolled past the standard bureaucratic boilerplate, searching for the core figures. My eyes locked onto the principal sum section. A staggering $150,000. It was a home equity line of credit, drawn against the exact property my parents claimed was their only remaining piece of security. My chest tightened. The math was brutal and indisputable. Daniel was not just skimming their checking account. He had convinced them to leverage the very roof over their heads to fund his lavish lifestyle and his empty Austin office. They were drowning in debt, actively financing my wedding sabotage, and playing the role of impoverished victims to my face. The next evening, the tension in my apartment was a physical weight. I stood at the kitchen island, rhythmically chopping bell peppers for dinner. The mechanical motion helped channel my racing thoughts. The stainless steel knife sliced through the red flesh with a sharp, satisfying crunch. My cell phone vibrated against the granite countertop, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. The caller identification read, Richard Smith. I paused the knife hovering midair. My father rarely called me on a weekday. He preferred to let my mother handle all emotional and logistical family communication. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, took a slow, deep breath, and swiped the green answer button. Hi, Dad. I kept my voice neutral. Alina, sweetheart. His tone was unnaturally bright, dripping with a forced joviality that set my teeth on edge. How is my favorite daughter doing today? I am your only daughter, Dad. I replied, staring at the chopped vegetables. What is going on? He cleared his throat. The false cheer faded, replaced by the serious, authoritative cadence he used whenever he wanted to control a narrative. Well, we hit a bit of a snag here at the house. That storm last week did a number on the roof. The contractor came out this morning and found severe structural damage under the shingles. We are looking at a $15,000 repair bill to stop the leaking." I closed my eyes. The weather in Dallas had been perfectly clear for 14 consecutive days. "That is terrible," I said, maintaining my flat tone. "Have you called the insurance company?" He rushed his answer, eager to pave over my logical question. "You know how those adjusters are. They claim it is general wear and tear, not storm damage. Your mother is sick with worry. We need to secure a short-term bridge loan to pay the roofers before the next rainfall ruins the drywall in the living room." I waited in silence. I knew the trap was set, and I was going to force him to spring it himself. The thing is, Richard continued, his voice dropping an octave into a conspiratorial whisper. "The banks are tightening their lending criteria. Since I am retired, they want a cosigner to guarantee the funds. Just a formality, really. We pay our bills. You know that. But you have that pristine credit score. You have never missed a payment in your life." The audacity of the request hung in the air. He was asking me to bind my financial future to his fabricated emergency. He wanted me to put my pristine credit on the line to feed the bottomless pit of my brother's shell company. "Dad, I cannot co-sign a loan for you. Liam and I are in the middle of paying our final wedding vendor installments. My debt-to-income ratio needs to remain spotless until we secure our own mortgage next year." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and toxic. When Richard finally spoke, the warmth was entirely gone. His voice was a blade of ice. "We spent 20 years sacrificing for you, Alina. We paid for your braces. We helped with your college textbooks. Families are supposed to step up when things get difficult. Daniel would do it in a heartbeat if his capital was not tied up in his new venture." "Daniel is draining you," I thought. But I kept my mouth shut. Engaging in a shouting match would only give him the satisfaction of a dramatic fight. "I am sorry, Dad. My answer is no. You always only thought about yourself." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. My hands were perfectly steady. I walked into the home office and sat at my computer. I opened my email inbox. Sure enough, 5 minutes before he called, Richard had sent me an email with the subject line marked "Urgent." Attached was a blank loan application form from a predatory online lending company. He had expected me to fold. He had expected the guilt trip to work flawlessly, just as it had for the last 3 decades. I hovered the cursor over the attachment. Instead of deleting it, I clicked download. I saved the unsigned PDF document directly to my encrypted hard drive. I labeled the folder Evidence. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. My mind drifted back to the county clerk portal and the devastating home equity line of credit document. Something about that dense legal filing nagged at the edges of my memory. I pulled the HELOC file back up on the screen. I scrolled past the terms and conditions, past the staggering principal amount, straight to the final page, the signature section. The notary stamp was pressed in black ink at the bottom. Above it were 2 signatures. The first belonged to Richard. It was a sharp, jagged scrawl, matching the signature on every birthday card and report card I ever received. Then I looked at the second signature, Patricia Smith. My mother had elegant, flowing cursive. She took pride in her penmanship, a relic from her days teaching elementary school handwriting. Her letters were always round, generous, and perfectly spaced. The signature on the screen was none of those things. It was cramped. The letters leaned heavily to the right. The capital P in Patricia was missing its customary bottom loop. The lowercase t was crossed with a harsh, slashing stroke. I stared at that slashing line. I knew that stroke. I had seen it on countless hastily scribbled notes on the back of borrowed $20 bills and on the signature line of the Austin Venture LLC business registration I had pulled days ago. My mother did not sign that staggering bank loan. She might not even know the full extent of the debt. My brother, the golden child, the visionary executive, had forged her signature to secure $150,000 of his parents' home equity. He was not just a liar, he was a felon. And I had the digital proof staring right back at me. I took Friday off from work. Operations managers do not act on fleeting emotions or sudden impulses. We operate on gathered data. And every piece of data I collected over the past 72 hours pointed directly down Interstate 35. The drive from Dallas to Austin took exactly 3 hours and 10 minutes. The Texas heat warped the air above the asphalt, creating shimmering mirages that vanished as soon as my tires touched them. It felt like a fitting metaphor for my brother's entire existence. The address listed on the state tax registry belonged to a towering structure of reflective glass and polished steel on Congress Avenue. This was the premium commercial district. The lobby smelled of expensive citrus floor cleaner and circulated air conditioning. I signed in at the marble security desk, my heels clicking a steady, determined rhythm across the floor as I walked to the elevator bank. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. I expected a bustling hub of innovation. I expected to hear the rapid clatter of keyboards, the low hum of strategy meetings, and the ringing of multi-line phone systems. Daniel had spent the last year bragging about his expanding payroll and his dynamic team of developers. The elevator doors parted. I walked down the carpeted hallway and pushed open the heavy glass door marked Suite 412. Silence swallowed me whole. There was no tech startup buzz. There was no dynamic team. The sprawling office suite was a ghost town. The air smelled of fresh drywall and stagnant dust. A single, cheap laminate desk sat in the center of the reception area. Behind it sat a young woman in a faded cardigan, scrolling lazily on her cell phone. Beyond her desk, the glass-walled conference rooms and executive suites were entirely bare. No desks, no ergonomic chairs, no computers, just empty space and hollow echoes. My brother's grand enterprise was a highly orchestrated shell game. Before the receptionist could look up from her screen, a door opened at the far end of the hallway. Daniel stepped out. He wore a tailored navy blazer, crisp khakis, and loafers that cost more than my first car. He was speaking into a wireless headset, waving his hand in a gesture of false importance. When his eyes landed on me, he stopped walking. The smooth, practiced charm evaporated from his face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. He tapped his headset, muttered a quick excuse, and ended his fake phone call. Alina. His voice was tight, echoing off the bare concrete floors. What are you doing here? I did not raise my voice. I did not demand answers. I simply opened my purse, pulled out a folded piece of printer paper, and set it on the edge of the receptionist's laminate desk. I unfolded it, flattening the creases. It was a high-resolution printout of the bank ledger. $40,000, I said, keeping my gaze locked on his eyes. And a recurring monthly draft of $2,500, drawn directly from the retirement accounts of 2 people who are currently leveraging their home equity to survive. Daniel looked at the paper. He looked at the memo line. Do not tell your sister. He did not flinch. He did not offer an apology. Instead, a cold, arrogant sneer twisted his features. The panic vanished, revealing the deeply entrenched entitlement of the golden child. He took 2 steps forward, entering my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne hung heavy in the stale air. You balance logistics spreadsheets for a living, Ollie. You move boxes from point A to point B. I build empires. Mom and Dad recognized potential. They provided initial seed capital for a venture that will redefine this family. They invested in a legacy. You just want them to waste their limited funds on a depreciating social gathering. A legacy. I gestured toward the barren glass rooms surrounding us. You do not even own a single desk chair, Daniel. You are running a fraud scheme. You are bleeding them dry, and you forged our mother's signature on a bank loan to do it. His jaw clenched. The mention of the forged signature hit the mark, but Daniel was a cornered animal. He did not retreat. He attacked. You need to tread very carefully right now, Alina. His voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous whisper. Liam is up for that regional director promotion at Sterling Logistics, is he not? My stomach plummeted. I kept my face entirely impassive. The managing partners at Sterling play golf at the Dallas Country Club every Sunday. Daniel continued, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. I happened to share a scotch with them in the clubhouse fairly often. They value my perspective on market trends. It would be a profound shame if I happened to mention that Liam lacks the strategic vision for a leadership role. One casual conversation, Alina. That is all it takes to poison the well. You keep digging into my business, and I will personally ensure your fiancé spends the rest of his career pushing paper in a cubicle. The threat hung in the empty room. He was willing to destroy Liam's hard-earned career just to protect his web of lies. But Daniel knew me well enough to realize a verbal threat would not stop my audit. He needed to cripple my immediate resources. He needed to disarm me on the battlefield. He pulled his smartphone from his blazer pocket. He tapped the screen and put the device on speakerphone. The line rang twice before Patricia answered. "Daniel, honey," her voice echoed in the hollow office. "Is everything all right, Mom?" Daniel said, injecting a masterful tone of distress and concern into his voice. "Alina just showed up at my office in Austin. She is harassing my staff. She is screaming about your finances and making wild accusations. She is acting highly erratic." Patricia gasped through the speaker. "Alina is there. Oh my goodness, I knew she was stressed about her catering budget, but this is unacceptable." I stood perfectly still, watching my brother manipulate our mother with terrifying ease. "Listen to me, Mom," Daniel continued, his eyes locked on mine with cold triumph. "She is threatening to retaliate against me. You need to protect the Joint Reserve Fund right now." My blood ran cold. The Joint Reserve Fund. When I was 16, I started working weekend shifts at a local grocery store. I saved every paycheck for college expenses. My parents opened a joint savings account with me because I was a minor. Over the years, I kept that specific account active, using it as my dedicated emergency fund. It currently held $8,000, the exact amount required for the final catering deposit due at noon today. "Call the branch manager," Daniel urged through the speaker. "Lock the childhood savings account. Freeze it before she drains the funds out of spite." "She is not thinking clearly, Mom. You have to secure the assets." "I will call them right this second," Patricia promised, her voice trembling with manufactured panic. "I am so sorry she is doing this to you, Daniel. I will handle it." The line went dead. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket. He offered me a patronizing smile. "You should probably head back to Dallas. It sounds like you have some vendor payments to figure out." I pulled my phone from my purse. I opened my banking application. The loading wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds. When the dashboard finally appeared, a stark red error banner flashed across the top of the screen. "Account restricted. Access denied. Please contact your branch administrator." He had severed my supply line. With a single phone call, he had weaponized our mother's blind loyalty to lock me out of my own hard-earned savings. I was suddenly fighting from a position of severe disadvantage. The catering contract would default by the end of the day. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing my panic. I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass exit door. "Excuse me." The quiet voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned back. The young temp worker behind the laminate desk was holding a thick yellow envelope in her hand. She looked nervously between Daniel and me. "The postal worker dropped this off by mistake this morning," she said, holding the envelope out toward me. "It has his home address printed on the label, but they routed it to the commercial suite by accident. I am off the clock in 5 minutes. Can you give it to him?" Daniel stepped forward, reaching for the mail, but I was faster. I took the heavy yellow envelope from the receptionist. I did not hand it back to my brother. I gripped it tightly in my hand and walked out the door, letting the heavy glass shut securely behind me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. As the car began its descent, I looked down at the return address stamped in bold black ink on the top left corner of the envelope. Travis County Tax Assessor. Below that, printed in stark red lettering, was the nature of the correspondence. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Daniel was not just bleeding my parents dry, he was losing his own house. I took Friday off from work. Operations managers do not act on fleeting emotions or sudden impulses. We operate on gathered data, and every piece of data I collected over the past 72 hours pointed directly down Interstate 35. The drive from Dallas to Austin took exactly 3 hours and 10 minutes. The Texas heat warped the air above the asphalt, creating shimmering mirages that vanished as soon as my tires touched them. It felt like a fitting metaphor for my brother's entire existence. The address listed on the state tax registry belonged to a towering structure of reflective glass and polished steel on Congress Avenue. This was the premium commercial district. The lobby smelled of expensive citrus floor cleaner and circulated air conditioning. I signed in at the Marvel security desk, my heels clicking a steady, determined rhythm across the floor as I walked to the elevator bank. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. I expected a bustling hub of innovation. I expected to hear the rapid clatter of keyboards, the low hum of strategy meetings, and the ringing of multi-line phone systems. Danielle had spent the last year bragging about his expanding payroll and his dynamic team of developers. The elevator doors parted. I walked down the carpeted hallway and pushed open the heavy glass door marked Suite 412. Silence swallowed me whole. There was no tech startup buzz. There was no dynamic team. The sprawling office suite was a ghost town. The air smelled of fresh drywall and stagnant dust. A single cheap laminate desk sat in the center of the reception area. Behind it sat a young woman in a faded cardigan, scrolling lazily on her cell phone. Beyond her desk, the glass-walled conference rooms and executive suites were entirely bare. No desks, no ergonomic chairs, no computers. Just empty space and hollow echoes. My brother's grand enterprise was a highly orchestrated shell game. Before the receptionist could look up from her screen, a door opened at the far end of the hallway. Daniel stepped out. He wore a tailored navy blazer, crisp khakis, and loafers that cost more than my first car. He was speaking into a wireless headset, waving his hand in a gesture of false importance. When his eyes landed on me, he stopped walking. The smooth, practiced charm evaporated from his face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. He tapped his headset, muttered a quick excuse, and ended his fake phone call. Alina. His voice was tight, echoing off the bare concrete floors. What are you doing here? I did not raise my voice. I did not demand answers. I simply opened my purse, pulled out a folded piece of printer paper, and set it on the edge of the receptionist's laminate desk. I unfolded it, flattening the creases. It was a high-resolution printout of the bank ledger. $40,000, I said, keeping my gaze locked on his eyes, and a recurring monthly draft of $2,500, drawn directly from the retirement accounts of 2 people who are currently leveraging their home equity to survive. Daniel looked at the paper. He looked at the memo line. Do not tell your sister. He did not flinch. He did not offer an apology. Instead, a cold, arrogant sneer twisted his features. The panic vanished, revealing the deeply entrenched entitlement of the golden child. He took 2 steps forward, entering my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne hung heavy in the stale air. You balance logistics spreadsheets for a living, Ali. You move boxes from point A to point B. I build empires. Mom and Dad recognized potential. They provided initial seed capital for a venture that will redefine this family. They invested in a legacy. You just want them to waste their limited funds on a depreciating social gathering. A legacy. I gestured toward the barren glass rooms surrounding us. You do not even own a single desk chair, Daniel. You are running a fraud scheme. You are bleeding them dry, and you forged our mother's signature on a bank loan to do it. His jaw clenched. The mention of the forged signature hit the mark, but Daniel was a cornered animal. He did not retreat. He attacked. You need to tread very carefully right now, Alina. His voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous whisper. Liam is up for that regional director promotion at Sterling Logistics, is he not? My stomach plummeted. I kept my face entirely impassive. The managing partners at Sterling play golf at the Dallas Country Club every Sunday. Daniel continued, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. I happen to share a scotch with them in the clubhouse fairly often. They value my perspective on market trends. It would be a profound shame if I happened to mention that Liam lacks the strategic vision for a leadership role. One casual conversation, Alina, that is all it takes to poison the well. You keep digging into my business, and I will personally ensure your fiancé spends the rest of his career pushing paper in a cubicle." The threat hung in the empty room. He was willing to destroy Liam's hard-earned career just to protect his web of lies. But Daniel knew me well enough to realize a verbal threat would not stop my audit. He needed to cripple my immediate resources. He needed to disarm me on the battlefield. He pulled his smartphone from his blazer pocket. He tapped the screen and put the device on speakerphone. The line rang twice before Patricia answered. "Daniel, honey?" Her voice echoed in the hollow office. "Is everything all right, Mom?" Daniel said, injecting a masterful tone of distress and concern into his voice, "Alina just showed up at my office in Austin. She is harassing my staff. She is screaming about your finances and making wild accusations. She is acting highly erratic." Patricia gasped through the speaker. "Alina is there? Oh my goodness. I knew she was stressed about her catering budget, but this is unacceptable." I stood perfectly still, watching my brother manipulate our mother with terrifying ease. "Listen to me, Mom," Daniel continued, his eyes locked on mine with cold triumph. "She is threatening to retaliate against me. You need to protect the Joint Reserve Fund right now." My blood ran cold. The Joint Reserve Fund. When I was 16, I started working weekend shifts at a local grocery store. I saved every paycheck for college expenses. My parents opened a joint savings account with me because I was a minor. Over the years, I kept that specific account active, using it as my dedicated emergency fund. It currently held $8,000, the exact amount required for the final catering deposit due at noon today. "Call the branch manager," Daniel urged through the speaker. "Lock the childhood savings account. Freeze it before she drains the funds out of spite. She is not thinking clearly, Mom. You have to secure the assets." "I will call them right this second," Patricia promised, her voice trembling with manufactured panic. "I am so sorry she is doing this to you, Daniel. I will handle it." The line went dead. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket. He offered me a patronizing smile. "You should probably head back to Dallas. It sounds like you have some vendor payments to figure out." I pulled my phone from my purse. I opened my banking application. The loading wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds. When the dashboard finally appeared, a stark red error banner flashed across the top of the screen. "Account restricted. Access denied. Please contact your branch administrator." He had severed my supply line. With a single phone call, he had weaponized our mother's blind loyalty to lock me out of my own hard-earned savings. I was suddenly fighting from a position of severe disadvantage. The catering contract would default by the end of the day. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing my panic. I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass exit door. "Excuse me." The quiet voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned back. The young temp worker behind the laminate desk was holding a thick, yellow envelope in her hand. She looked nervously between Daniel and me. "The postal worker dropped this off by mistake this morning," she said, holding the envelope out toward me. "It has his home address printed on the label, but they routed it to the commercial suite by accident. I am off the clock in 5 minutes. Can you give it to him?" Daniel stepped forward, reaching for the mail, but I was faster. I took the heavy yellow envelope from the receptionist. I did not hand it back to my brother. I gripped it tightly in my hand and walked out the door, letting the heavy glass shut securely behind me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. As the car began its descent, I looked down at the return address stamped in bold black ink on the top left corner of the envelope. Travis County Tax Assessor. Below that, printed in stark red lettering, was the nature of the correspondence. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Daniel was not just bleeding my parents dry. He was losing his own house. I looked down at my mother's hand gripping my upper arm. Her knuckles were white, the veins standing out against her pale skin. I did not pull away immediately. I let the silence stretch between us, allowing the sheer impropriety of her action to register in the quiet hallway of my future mother-in-law's home. The soft jazz music from the sunroom floated through the air, a stark contrast to the rigid tension radiating from the woman standing in front of me. "Release my arm, Mom." My voice was a low, measured whisper. I kept my expression entirely neutral, betraying zero emotion. We are not doing this here. If you want to have a conversation about Daniel, we will do it outside. Patricia blinked her eyes, darting toward the archway, where two passing guests offered polite smiles. She let go of my arm as if the fabric of my blouse had burned her fingertips. She smoothed the front of her floral skirt, her chest heaving with quick, shallow breaths. I turned and walked out the heavy oak front door, leading her down the paved driveway toward her parked sedan. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. The interior of her car trapped the Texas heat, smelling faintly of peppermint gum and stale hairspray. I slid into the passenger seat. Patricia climbed behind the steering wheel. Before she even closed her door, the anger that fueled her march through the hallway evaporated. The rigid posture collapsed. She gripped the leather steering wheel with both hands, rested her forehead against the curve, and began to sob. These were not the calculated, manipulative tears she deployed over the discount shortbread cookies in her kitchen. This was raw, unvarnished panic. Her shoulders shook. Short, ragged gasps echoed in the stifling cabin of the vehicle. "He is drowning, Alina." The words spilled from her mouth between wet, heavy breaths. "Daniel called me right after you left his office on Friday. The investors pulled out at the last minute. It was just a temporary cash flow issue, but the landlord is being ruthless. They are threatening to lock the doors on Monday morning if he does not pay the arrears." I sat back against the upholstered seat, watching her unravel. "How much does he owe?" $20,000. She lifted her head, her mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Her gaze locked onto mine, frantic and desperate. "He needs $20,000 by Monday to keep the lights on and secure the new seed round. Once the new investors clear the paperwork, he can pay us all back with interest. It is just a temporary hurdle." I looked straight through the windshield at the quiet suburban street. My mind processed the data. He was missing commercial rent payments. He was facing eviction. The $40,000 wire transfer was already gone, swallowed by the black hole of his fake empire. "We do not have it," Patricia pleaded, reaching across the center console to grab my hand. "Your father and I tapped out the emergency reserves. We took out a line of credit to help him float the payroll last month, and the bank will not approve another advance." "You mean the line of credit you secured by forging your signature on a home equity loan?" I thought. I kept the revelation locked behind my teeth. I needed her to play her entire hand before I laid my cards on the table. "I do not have $20,000 either, Mom." I stated the fact clearly. "Every spare cent I have is tied up in wedding vendor deposits." Her grip on my hand tightened. Her eyes widened, shifting from panic to a terrifying singular focus. "You can cancel them." The words hung in the hot air inside the car. I stared at her, waiting for a punchline that was never going to come. "Cancel the caterer," Patricia urged, her voice gaining momentum. "Cancel the string quartet. Downsize the venue. You and Liam can have a beautiful, intimate ceremony in our backyard. We can grill burgers. It does not need to be a lavish 150-person spectacle. If you pull out now, most of those vendors have to refund a percentage of your deposits. You can wire that cash to Daniel on Monday morning." The sheer audacity of the demand settled over me like a heavy blanket. She was asking me to dismantle my own wedding, a celebration I financed entirely on my own, to bail out the brother who had actively tried to sabotage it just days prior. This dynamic was not new. It was the defining theme of my upbringing. I remembered the night of my high school graduation. I had earned the title of valedictorian. We had dinner reservations at a premium steakhouse downtown to celebrate, but Daniel called 2 hours before the reservation. His used sports car needed a new engine block. He had spent his repair savings on a luxury vacation to Mexico. My parents canceled my graduation dinner, transferred the steakhouse funds directly to his mechanic, and ordered a cheap cheese pizza for me instead. I ate my celebratory dinner alone at the kitchen counter, while they spent the evening comforting Daniel over the phone. I was always the expendable resource. My milestones were always subject to liquidation the moment Daniel encountered a consequence. "Mom," I said, slowly removing my hand from her grasp, I am not canceling my wedding. Daniel needs to face the reality of his failed business. He needs to file for bankruptcy. You do not understand. Patricia slammed her hands against the steering wheel, her voice rising to a frantic shriek. He cannot just walk away. They will take everything. I pulled my phone from my purse. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning, forming a devastating picture. The panic in her voice was too sharp, too personal. This was not just a mother worried about her son's bruised ego. This was the terror of a woman staring down the barrel of her own ruin. I opened my encrypted file folder. I navigated to the Texas Public Records database download I compiled days ago. I pulled up the commercial lease agreement for Austin Venture, LLC. I understand perfectly well, I said, tapping the screen to enlarge the digital document. I spent a long time looking at these filings. I noticed something very interesting about the lease Daniel signed for that premium office suite on Congress Avenue. I held the phone up, turning the screen toward her face. A commercial landlord does not hand over the keys to a brand new startup with zero revenue unless they have a guarantee. I pointed to the final page of the PDF. Daniel did not have the credit history to secure that space on his own. He needed a personal guarantor, someone who assumed full legal liability for the lease if the business defaulted. Patricia stared at the glowing screen. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her face an ashen, chalky white. I zoomed in on the signature line. Right there below Daniel's sloppy scrawl was the elegant, unmistakable cursive of a former elementary school teacher. You did not just give him seed money, Mom. My voice was devoid of anger, devoid of sympathy. It was the sterile tone of an auditor reading a balance sheet. You signed your name on the dotted line. You are legally on the hook for a multi-year commercial lease in downtown Austin. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, rattling breath escaped. If Daniel defaults tomorrow, the landlord is not just evicting him. They are coming after the guarantor. They will sue you for the remaining balance of the contract. They will garnish your accounts. They will force the sale of your home to satisfy the judgment. The illusion shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces on the dashboard between us. Patricia was not a selfless mother desperately trying to save her golden child. She was a trapped accomplice. She was begging me to cancel my wedding and surrender my life savings because she was terrified of facing federal lawsuits and financial ruin. She wanted to use my joy as a shield to deflect the consequences of her own reckless enabling. A profound shift occurred inside my chest. The invisible umbilical cord, the desperate, lingering hope that my mother might one day choose me over him, snapped. It was a clean, painless severing. I felt nothing but a cold, liberating detachment. I locked my phone and dropped it back into my purse. I am not liquidating my future to pay for your mistakes, I said, reaching for the door handle. You tied yourself to a sinking ship. You and Daniel are going to have to figure out how to swim. Patricia stiffened. The panic in her eyes hardened into a dark, venomous glare. The mask of the loving, distressed mother fell away entirely, revealing the desperate, cornered woman underneath. If you walk out of this car right now, she warned, her voice dropping into a vicious, trembling register, do not expect us to walk down the aisle. I paused, with the door half open, the warm Texas air rushing into the stagnant cabin. If you do not help your brother, Patricia hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest, neither your father nor I will attend your wedding. You will stand up there all by yourself, Alina. We will not be a part of it. I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years teaching me that my worth was conditional. I stepped out onto the driveway, my heels finding solid ground. That is the best wedding gift you have ever given me, I replied. I shut the heavy car door, cutting off her response, and walked back toward the sunroom without looking over my shoulder. I walked into our apartment and locked the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed in the quiet hallway, sealing the toxic remnants of the bridal shower outside. Liam was already home, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open. Unlike my family, Liam grew up in a household where money was a volatile, terrifying subject. His father was a serial entrepreneur who chased bad investments until the bank foreclosed on their modest duplex. That early instability molded Liam into a man who valued predictability above all else. He became a corporate risk analyst. He monitored his financial health with the same vigilance a doctor monitors a pulse. He never missed a payment. He never carried a balance. He checked his credit dashboard every single Sunday evening without fail. Today, his routine broke. I dropped my purse on the entryway table and walked toward the kitchen. Liam did not look up. His eyes were locked on the glowing screen, his jaw set in a rigid line. "Alina," he said, his voice stripped of its usual warmth, "come look at this." I stepped behind his stool and peered over his shoulder. The dashboard of his credit monitoring software displayed a bright red warning banner. A hard credit inquiry had been initiated 45 minutes ago. "Did you apply for a new rewards card?" I asked, tracing the screen with my eyes. "No," Liam replied, typing rapidly to pull up the detailed report. "Someone submitted an application for a commercial revolving credit line, $50,000. The screen refreshed, displaying the origin of the inquiry. The applicant, business name, was listed clearly, Austin Venture, LLC. The air in the kitchen turned cold. The reality of the words settled over us like a heavy shroud. "How does Daniel have your social security number?" I whispered, the implications forming a dark, terrifying cloud in my mind. Liam rubbed his temples, his mind racing through past interactions. 3 years ago, when we applied for this apartment lease, the property management company required a joint background check. I printed the forms and brought them to your parents' house because our printer was broken. I left a copy of the application in the den on the oak desk. Daniel had access to the den. He had access to every piece of paper in that suburban house. Liam did not just stare at the screen. He picked up his phone and dialed the fraud prevention hotline for the issuing bank. He spent 40 minutes navigating automated menus and speaking to security representatives. He verified his identity, placed a hard freeze on his credit profile, and confirmed the fraudulent application was flagged and halted before any funds were dispersed. The representative noted the application originated from an Internet Protocol address located in Travis County, Austin, Texas. My brother was no longer just a spoiled son draining his parents' retirement funds. He had crossed a hard, unforgiving line. Forging my mother's signature on a home equity loan was a desperate family betrayal. Using my fiancé's social security number to open a $50,000 commercial credit line was federal identity theft. The emotional detachment I felt in Patricia's car solidified into a cold, tactical armor. I walked into my home office and dragged a folding table into the center of the room. "Bring your laptop," I told Liam. "We are mapping everything." We spent the entire weekend building a digital fortress. We did not discuss the caterer. We did not finalize the seating chart for our reception. We operated like forensic accountants preparing for a federal grand jury. The printer in the corner of the office whirred to life, spitting out page after page of financial ruin. The smell of hot toner filled the small room. We did not speak much. We operated in a synchronized rhythm forged by years of mutual respect. I pinned a timeline to the corkboard above my desk. I started with the $40,000 wire transfer. I drew a thick black marker line connecting it to the monthly auto drafts. Next to that, I pinned the commercial lease agreement featuring my mother's forged signature. Liam printed the rejected credit application and pinned it directly below the lease. I highlighted discrepancies in the bank statements, while Liam cross-referenced the dates of the wire transfers with the deposits required for Vanessa's designer wardrobe. We were not just building a case, we were dissecting a financial corpse. We revealed a pattern of escalating desperation. Daniel exhausted the stolen $40,000. He drained the home equity line of credit. He realized his landlord was going to evict him and sue our mother. In a blind panic to secure the $20,000 he needed to keep the lights on, he attempted to steal Liam's pristine financial identity. On Monday evening, while we were organizing our physical files into neat labeled folders, my cell phone vibrated on the desk. It was a notification from the family group chat. I had muted the conversation weeks ago, but I kept it active for intelligence gathering. I opened the message. It was a long, boasting text from Daniel, complete with a photograph of him holding a glass of expensive scotch in a dimly lit steakhouse. "Big moves happening this week," the text read. "I just secured a verbal commitment from Apex Ventures out of Palo Alto. Their senior partner is flying into Texas on Thursday. We are finalizing a $2 million seed round. All the long nights and sacrifices are finally paying off. Legacy in the making." I stared at the glowing screen, my mind dissecting the lie. Apex Ventures, a prominent Silicon Valley firm. Daniel was weaving a brilliant, distracting narrative. He knew I uncovered the truth about his empty office and his pending eviction. He knew Patricia was panicking about her liability as a guarantor. So he threw a red herring into the water. He needed to project an image of monumental, imminent success to keep the illusion alive for just a few more days. He was buying time, hoping the fake venture capitalist story would stop my parents from cutting off their remaining credit cards. "He is doubling down," Liam said, reading the message over my shoulder. "He wants them to believe salvation is just one meeting away." Tuesday morning brought the final piece of the puzzle. I walked down to the lobby of our apartment building to retrieve the mail. Nestled between utility bills and grocery store circulars was a thick, square envelope made of premium, heavy cardstock. It bore no return address, only my name written in swirling professional calligraphy. I tore the flap open in the elevator. A rigid, embossed invitation slid into my palm. The gold foil lettering caught the fluorescent light of the elevator cabin. "Richard and Patricia Smith joyfully invite you to an exclusive gala celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Austin Venture LLC." I scanned the details at the bottom of the card. The venue was the Grand Ballroom of the Dallas Country Club, a premier location that required a minimum $10,000 deposit just to reserve the space, plus a mandatory food and beverage minimum that easily doubled the initial cost. My eyes dropped to the date printed in elegant, sweeping numbers. The celebration was scheduled for a Thursday evening, exactly 48 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle at my own wedding. My parents had claimed they possessed no money to buy appetizers for my reception. Patricia had begged me to cancel my vendors to pay Daniel's overdue rent. Yet they were hosting a lavish, high-society dinner at a luxury country club to celebrate a fraudulent company, and they scheduled it specifically to overshadow my wedding weekend. I held the heavy cardstock invitation in my hands, tracing the raised gold foil letters with my thumb. The invitation demanded a response. The typical reaction would involve screaming, throwing the elegant paper in the trash, and severing all contact. A younger version of myself might have driven to my parents' house and demanded an explanation for their hypocrisy. But the operations manager inside my head recognized a rare tactical advantage. They thought I was beaten. They assumed the freeze on my childhood savings account and the threat to Liam's career had successfully intimidated me into submission. They expected me to retreat into the shadows and lick my wounds while they basked in the glow of their fabricated success. I set the invitation on the kitchen island and looked at Liam. "We are going," I said. Liam raised an eyebrow, pausing with his coffee mug halfway to his mouth. "Are you sure about that?" "Walking into that room validates their delusion." "It does not validate it," I replied, a cool, steady calm settling over my pulse. "It gives me direct access to the mainframe." Daniel loves an audience. He thrives on presentation. He is going to stand up in front of those country club members and pitch a fairy tale to hide his incoming eviction and his federal identity theft attempt. He needs infrastructure to tell that story. I am going to volunteer to build it for him. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. I closed my eyes, visualizing a steel vault locking my genuine emotions inside. I needed to play the role of the compliant, defeated daughter, the peacemaker who could not bear the thought of a fractured family right before her wedding. Patricia answered on the third ring. Her tone was stiff, guarded, ready for an argument. "Mom," I said, injecting a subtle manufactured tremor into my voice, "I am calling to apologize." The line remained silent for a long moment. When Patricia finally spoke, the rigid defense in her voice softened into a familiar, patronizing warmth. "Oh, Alina, I knew you would come around. You have always been so headstrong, but family is family. We all say things we do not mean when we are stressed about finances." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I received the invitation to Daniel's anniversary dinner. I continued keeping my tone humble and submissive. "I know things got heated in your car last week, but I do not want to walk down the aisle on Saturday with this dark cloud hanging over us. I want to support Daniel. I want to be there on Thursday night." "That is wonderful news," sweetheart Patricia cooed, her relief palpable through the speaker. "Your brother will be so pleased. He is under an immense amount of pressure, preparing his keynote speech for the new investors." "I know he is," I said, setting the trap. "That is actually why I am calling. Country club event coordinators charge a fortune for basic audio and visual management. You know my logistics background. I run corporate presentations for my firm all the time. Let me handle the slideshow and the projector for his speech. It will save him a few $1,000s on an AV contractor, and it can be my olive branch to the family." Patricia gasped a genuine sound of delight. "Oh, Alina, that is so generous of you. Daniel was just complaining about the exorbitant fees the club wanted to charge for a simple screen and microphone setup. He will be thrilled. I will text you the venue coordinator's contact information right now." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. The bait was in the water, and they swallowed it whole. The next 48 hours moved in a deliberate, methodical blur. While Daniel polished his fake keynote speech and Vanessa booked salon appointments for the gala, Liam and I secured our own perimeter. We took Tuesday morning off from work and visited our local bank branch. We sat in a private office and withdrew the remaining balance of our wedding funds in physical cash. The teller handed us thick, banded stacks of $100 bills. We spent the afternoon driving across the Dallas Metroplex. We visited our venue coordinator, our caterer, and the new modest florist we hired to replace the one Vanessa stole. We handed them envelopes of cash, securing paper receipts with physical signatures. We severed our wedding from the digital grid. Daniel could not freeze physical currency. Vanessa could not outbid a contract that was already paid in full. By the end of the day, our wedding was an impenetrable fortress. The contrast between our quiet, honest transactions and Daniel's impending country club spectacle provided a deep, grounding comfort. On Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed with an incoming group video call. Patricia, Daniel, and Vanessa populated the screen. They wanted to discuss the timeline for the gala. Vanessa lounged on a white leather sofa sipping sparkling water. Daniel sat at a glass table wearing a designer polo shirt. "I cannot believe you are actually doing something useful for once," Allie Vanessa drawled, her tone dripping with condescension. "Make sure the aspect ratio is set correctly on those slides. The last thing Daniel needs is a distorted logo when the venture capitalists walk into the room." Daniel chuckled, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Do not be too hard on her, Vanessa. Free labor is free labor. We just need her to click the mouse when I give the signal. It is not exactly rocket science." I smiled at the camera. My expression was placid and cooperative. "I will make sure everything runs exactly as you deserve, Daniel. You just focus on the speech." The dramatic irony tasted like fine wine. They gloated openly, relishing the opportunity to treat me like unpaid help, entirely unaware that the encrypted hard drive sitting next to my keyboard held the digital guillotine that would sever their facade from reality. Thursday afternoon arrived with a stifling humid heat. I drove to the Dallas Country Club 4 hours before the guests were scheduled to arrive. The venue was a monument to old money and exclusivity. The floors were polished marble. The air smelled of expensive floor wax and imported orchids. The grand ballroom featured crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking an immaculate golf course. I walked into the ballroom carrying a sleek black laptop bag. A row of gilded mahogany chairs faced a raised stage. A massive projection screen hung behind a wooden podium. I set my equipment on the designated audio-visual table situated in the back corner of the room. I connected the heavy display cables to my laptop, powering up the system. The screen behind the podium flickered to life, displaying a neutral blue background. I ran a quick diagnostic check, ensuring the sound system integrated perfectly with my computer. Every keystroke felt heavy, anchoring me to the gravity of the impending evening. The pacing of my own heartbeat slowed down, settling into a cold, suffocating dread. A man in a sharp gray suit approached my table. He wore a gold name tag identifying him as the banquet manager. He carried a leather clipboard, his eyes scanning the room with professional scrutiny. "You must be the sister handling the presentation," he said, offering a polite, practiced smile. "The Smith family has certainly spared no expense tonight. The chef is preparing the filet mignon as we speak." I adjusted the angle of my monitor. "It is a big night for my brother," I replied neutrally. The manager nodded, checking a box on his clipboard. "He certainly knows how to throw a party. I have to admit, we rarely book this room on such short notice, but your father was very persuasive." I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "My father booked the room." "He did," the manager confirmed, leaning casually against the edge of my table. "Mr. Smith came in last week to sign the contract. He handed over the $10,000 security deposit via a personal check. It is highly unusual for us to accept personal checks for an event of this scale without a clearing period. But he is a long-standing member here. We expect the funds to clear our accounting department by tomorrow morning." The manager offered a final polite nod and walked away to inspect the floral arrangements on the dining tables. I stood frozen behind the glowing laptop screen. A chill radiated down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. $10,000. Paid via a personal check from Richard's account. I had viewed that exact bank ledger just a few days ago. I knew exactly what that account held. After the outgoing $40,000 wire transfer and the recurring monthly drafts from Daniel's fake startup, the balance was nearly zero. The home equity line of credit was entirely tapped out. My father wrote a $10,000 check to one of the most elite institutions in Texas, fully aware that he did not possess the funds to cover it. The check was a ticking time bomb, scheduled to bounce the moment the country club accountants deposited it on Friday morning. The timer had just hit zero. By 7 o'clock, the grand ballroom of the Dallas Country Club transformed into a theater of fabricated prosperity. The heavy oak doors swung outward, admitting a tide of tailored tuxedos and glittering evening gowns. The air quickly grew thick with the competing scents of expensive floral centerpieces, roasted tenderloin, and the distinct, musky aroma of aged scotch. I remained stationed behind the audio-visual table in the rear corner of the room, enveloped by the shadows of thick velvet curtains. I wore a structured charcoal gray suit, tailored with sharp, unforgiving lines. I did not wear silk or jewels. I dressed for an execution, not a celebration. I observed the incoming crowd with the clinical precision of a security auditor. Richard had invited his entire roster of retired golfing companions. Men with silver hair and sun-baked skin clutched low-ball glasses, discussing market trends they barely comprehended. Vanessa corralled her exclusive circle of friends near the ice sculpture, posing for photographs and flashing her stolen Cartier watch under the warm glow of the chandeliers. Patricia fluttered between groups, her laughter pitched a fraction too high, her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance every few minutes. Daniel worked the floor like a seasoned politician. He clapped shoulders, kissed cheeks, and handed out thick, embossed business cards. I tracked his movements, waiting for the guest of honor to arrive. During his video call the previous night, Daniel boasted that a senior partner from Apex Ventures was flying in from Palo Alto to deliver a staggering seed funding offer. I watched the heavy oak doors for an hour and a half. The Silicon Valley titan never materialized. The VIP table remained occupied only by my parents and Vanessa. The venture capitalist was a ghost. The story was a desperate fabrication designed to pacify Patricia and secure this luxurious venue. Daniel was not courting elite institutional investors tonight. He was cornering local dentists, retired car dealership owners, and Richard's wealthy country club associates, aggressively pitching his empty shell company to anyone holding a cocktail. The scent of expensive cigar smoke and imported liquor signaled my father's approach. Richard separated from a group of men wearing matching pastel ties. He walked toward my secluded corner, his posture unnaturally rigid. The false confidence radiated from him, acting as a brittle shield to hide the crushing weight of his unpayable home equity debt. He stopped in front of my folding table, resting his lowball glass near my encrypted laptop. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my austere suit. "You could have worn a dress, Alina," he remarked, his tone dripping with casual disappointment. "It is a formal event. You look like you are heading to a board meeting." "I am working tonight, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat. I tapped the edge of the computer monitor. "I need to blend into the background so Daniel can shine." Richard took a slow sip of his drink, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The defensive tension in his shoulders relaxed slightly. My submissive posture fed his ego, confirming his belief that the natural family hierarchy had been restored. He reached out and offered 2 condescending pats on my shoulder. "I am glad you finally decided to stop being so difficult," he murmured, leaning closer. "I knew you would eventually see reason and know your place in this family. Your mother was very upset with your behavior last week, but bringing you here to handle the technical chores was a smart compromise. It builds character." I looked at the hand resting on my shoulder. His skin was pale, and a faint, undeniable tremor shook his fingers. He was terrified. Beneath the arrogance and the tailored suit, my father was a man staring down the barrel of impending bankruptcy. He needed this night to be real just as much as Daniel did. Daniel is on the verge of something extraordinary. Richard continued, his eyes scanning the crowded ballroom with desperate hunger. "Once this seed round clears, Austin Venture is going to expand exponentially. I was actually talking to him earlier today about your future." I tilted my head, adopting an expression of mild curiosity. "My future?" "Yes," Richard said, puffing his chest out. "You are very organized, Alina. You handle spreadsheets and logistics well. Daniel is going to need reliable administrative support when he opens his new corporate headquarters. A dedicated secretary to manage his calendar and screen his calls. If you play your cards right tonight and stop making a fuss about your little wedding budget, he might just hire you. It would be a significant step up from routing freight trucks." The sheer audacity of the proposition hung in the stifling air. He was offering me a hypothetical clerical position at a company that did not own a single piece of furniture, run by a man who had forged my mother's signature and attempted to steal my fiancé's social security number. He expected me to be grateful for the scraps falling from a fraudulent table. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I let the insult wash over me, feeling the cold, smooth steel of my impending retaliation harden in my chest. I looked at the projection screen hanging above the wooden podium, then back to my father. "That is an incredible offer, Dad," I whispered, smiling a tight, chilling smile. My right hand moved slowly across the desk, coming to rest gently over the computer mouse. "I will make sure Daniel gets exactly the presentation he deserves. Tonight." Richard nodded, satisfied with my apparent surrender. He picked up his scotch glass and turned back toward the glittering crowd. "Good girl. Do not mess up the slides." The banquet staff began clearing the salad plates, replacing them with heavy porcelain dishes holding roasted filet mignon and asparagus. The ambient noise in the ballroom shifted from bright chatter to the muted clatter of silverware. The overhead chandeliers dimmed to a soft golden glow, signaling the transition to the evening entertainment. The cooling fan inside my projector hummed to life, casting a stark white beam across the room. Through the dim lighting, I noticed a sudden erratic movement near the entrance. The banquet manager I spoke with earlier was striding across the patterned carpet. He no longer wore his polite, practiced smile. His face was pale, his jaw set in a tight, furious line. He clutched a folded piece of paper in his fist. He bypassed the serving staff and marched directly toward the VIP table. Daniel was standing near the wooden podium adjusting his silk tie and reviewing a set of index cards. The manager intercepted him, stepping uncomfortably close to maintain privacy. I watched their interaction with predatory focus. The manager spoke in rapid, clipped sentences, gesturing sharply toward the folded paper. Even from 50 feet away, I could read the aggressive shift in the manager's body language. The country club accounting department did not wait until Friday morning to process the $10,000 security deposit. They had run the routing numbers through their electronic verification system during the cocktail hour. The check had bounced. The notification of insufficient funds had triggered an immediate alert. Daniel froze. The arrogant swagger evaporated, leaving him rigid and exposed under the dim lights. He glanced nervously around the room, ensuring none of the wealthy guests were watching the confrontation. He leaned in, whispering furiously to the manager. Daniel waved his hand in a dismissive sweeping motion, adopting an expression of extreme offense. He was likely blaming a clerical banking error, promising to wire the funds first thing in the morning, utilizing every ounce of his manipulative charm to prevent the manager from terminating the event on the spot. The manager hesitated, his face flushed with professional outrage. He looked at the 200 guests actively consuming expensive meals. Creating a public scene would reflect poorly on the club. He offered Daniel a curt, threatening nod, pointing a stiff finger at the podium before turning on his heel and storming back toward the kitchen doors. Daniel took a deep, shuddering breath. He smoothed the lapels of his navy blazer, forcing his panic down into a dark, hidden compartment. He plastered a brilliant, artificial smile across his face and stepped up to the wooden podium. The master of ceremonies, a local radio personality Daniel had hired for the evening, approached the microphone. He tapped the metal grill, sending a sharp, echoing thump through the ballroom speakers. The lingering conversations died away, replaced by the expectant silence of the Texas elite. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming across the grand space. "Please direct your attention to the stage. It is my distinct honor to introduce a true visionary, the founder and chief executive officer of Austin Venture, Mr. Daniel Smith." The applause rippled across the grand ballroom. It was a polite, expensive sound echoing off the crystal fixtures above. Daniel stepped to the wooden podium, bathing in the warm spotlight. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored navy blazer. He offered a practiced, humble smile, waiting for the room to quiet down. I sat in the shadows of the audio-visual booth, my fingers resting on the smooth plastic of my trackpad. The cooling fan of my laptop hummed a steady rhythm. It reminded me of the server rooms I used to inspect during my early days as a logistics intern. I learned back then that every complex system possessed a single point of failure. Daniel was about to discover his. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Daniel began. His voice resonated through the premium surround sound speakers, rich and full of false conviction. "When I look out at this crowd, I see the spirit of true entrepreneurship. Building Austin Venture from the ground up required sacrifice. It required late nights, lean budgets, and an unwavering belief in fiscal responsibility." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. At the front table, Patricia wiped a tear from her cheek with a linen napkin. Richard puffed out his chest, nodding in solemn agreement. Daniel always possessed a talent for stealing valor. When I was in the 8th grade, I spent 3 weeks building a functional solar oven for the regional science fair. The night before the competition, Daniel broke his own project. He took my solar oven, peeled off my name tag, and submitted it as his own work. My parents told me to let him have the win because he needed the academic boost for college applications. He took the blue ribbon, I took the lesson. He never built anything in his life. He only consumed what others created. We bootstrapped this company. Daniel continued pacing a few steps across the stage. We did not rely on handouts or trust funds. We built a legacy through grit. And tonight, we unveil the next phase of our operation. Alina, if you would cue the presentation. This was the signal. The moment he expected his sleek, professionally designed corporate logo to illuminate the towering projection screen behind him. I did not hesitate. My pulse remained slow, steady, and clinical. I pressed the trackpad. The projector cast a blinding white rectangle across the wall. It was not a graphic design. It was a high-resolution scan of a Chase bank ledger. The numbers were magnified to towering proportions, stark and undeniable in bold, black ink. The clatter of silverware ceased instantly. 200 wealthy guests stopped chewing their roasted tenderloin. They squinted at the bright display, their minds struggling to interpret the crude financial document taking the place of a corporate pitch. I moved my cursor across the screen, activating the digital highlighter tool. A bright yellow bar appeared over a specific row near the bottom of the ledger. Outgoing wire transfer, $40,000. Recipient, Daniel Smith. I dragged the cursor to the right, highlighting the memo field in a bright neon green. Do not tell your sister. A low murmur rippled through the audience. A prominent local dentist, sitting in the second row, lowered his wine glass, his brow furrowing in confusion. The silence in the room grew heavy, thick with sudden tension. Daniel stopped pacing. The confident smile slipped from his face. He turned around, staring up at the giant projection of his own stolen seed money. He blinked rapidly, his mind misfiring as he tried to comprehend the visual evidence exposing his foundational lie. At the VIP table, Richard knocked over his scotch glass. The crystal shattered against the edge of the table, sending amber liquid dripping onto the patterned carpet. Patricia clamped both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting terror. I reached for the secondary microphone resting on my folding table. I flipped the power switch upward. A tiny green indicator light confirmed the channel was live. I brought the metal mesh close to my lips. Daniel is right about one thing, I said. My voice echoed through the ballroom. It was cool, precise, and devoid of any emotional tremor. It sliced through the confused murmurs of the crowd like a surgical blade. Building a legacy requires a solid foundation, I continued, keeping my eyes locked on my brother's pale face. But his foundation was not built on late nights or relentless work ethic. Daniel snapped his attention toward my dark corner. "Alina," he hissed into his own microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "Turn that off. Turn the projector off right now." I ignored his command. I clicked the trackpad a second time. The screen refreshed. The bank ledger vanished, replaced by a dense legal filing. The header identified it as a home equity line of credit. The principal sum of $150,000 dominated the center of the document. I scrolled directly to the final page, projecting the signature lines across the wall. I highlighted the jagged, hurried script, claiming to be Patricia Smith. "My brother is a visionary," I said calmly over the speakers. "He built a tech empire entirely out of our parents' home equity. He drained their retirement. When the cash ran dry, he forged our mother's signature to leverage the roof over their heads." The quiet murmurs erupted into a chorus of shocked gasps and intense whispers. The local businessmen and retired executives traded sharp, assessing glances. The facade was disintegrating in real time. These men recognized financial fraud when they saw it. Vanessa leaped up from her chair at the VIP table. The realization of her impending social ruin contorted her features into a mask of pure desperation. She was not going to let me dismantle her billionaire wife persona without a fight. She bolted toward my audio-visual table, her silk dress billowing behind her, intending to physically rip the cables from my computer. She moved with reckless, frantic speed, but she forgot she was wearing 4-inch designer stilettos on a highly polished marble floor. Halfway across the room, her right heel caught the slick edge of a decorative brass floor grate. The thin structural support of the expensive shoe snapped with a loud, distinct crack. Vanessa's ankle rolled sharply. She pitched forward, arms flailing in the air, and slammed into the marble tile. Her designer clutch skittered across the floor, spilling lipstick and mints across the polished stone. A few guests gasped, stepping back to avoid her sprawling form. Nobody reached down to help her up. The socialites she had kissed on the cheek earlier simply stared at her with cold, judging eyes. Daniel gripped the sides of his wooden podium, his knuckles turning white. The veins in his neck bulged. "Security!" he bellowed into the microphone, his voice shrill and desperate. "Get her out of here! Cut the power to the back table!" A pair of banquet staff members hovered near the kitchen doors, looking uncertainly at the club manager, who remained rooted to his spot, arms crossed, watching the destruction of the man whose $10,000 check had just bounced. No one moved to intervene. I did not need much more time. The operation was nearly complete. "I am leaving, Daniel," I said into my microphone. "You can keep the stage. But I think your investors should see the final return on their investment before they write you any checks tonight." I pressed the trackpad one final time. The forged loan document disappeared. A new stark piece of correspondence flashed onto the screen. It was the thick yellow envelope I intercepted from the receptionist at his empty office suite. The official seal of the Travis County tax assessor sat in the top corner. The bold red lettering stretched 20 feet across the ballroom wall. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. The whispers turned into loud, indignant conversations. A man in the second row stood up, threw his napkin onto his half-eaten filet mignon, and walked toward the exit. 2 more executives immediately followed him, wanting no association with a sinking, fraudulent ship. I watched the dominoes fall from my secluded corner. The years of being told I was difficult, the endless financial sacrifices I made to keep the peace, the quiet moments of swallowing my pride to accommodate his ego. All of it evaporated in the cool, air-conditioned breeze of the ballroom. I reached down and disconnected the display cable from the side of my laptop. The towering screen blinked black, leaving the stage illuminated only by the warm glow of the chandeliers. I folded my computer shut, slid it into my protective carrying case, and switched off my microphone. The silence that followed the black screen was deafening. The truth sat heavy in the room, crushing the last remnants of my family's performative wealth. I zipped my bag, turned my back on the wreckage, and walked out the side exit, leaving them to drown in the reality they had funded. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open, but not to welcome new arrivals. They served as an escape route. The sudden darkness of the projection screen did nothing to erase the stark financial truths burned into the retinas of every guest in attendance. The silence that followed my final keystroke shattered into a chaotic symphony of scraping chairs and dropped silverware. The elite members of the Dallas Country Club did not tolerate public scandal. They thrived on discretion, and Daniel had just dragged them into a glaring, undeniable fraud. Men in expensive tuxedos tossed linen napkins onto their untouched porcelain plates. They murmured hushed, urgent directives to their wives, ushering them away from the VIP tables. The exodus was swift and ruthless. No one offered Daniel a sympathetic pat on the back. No one approached my parents to offer condolences. In the hierarchy of Texas high society, financial insolvency was a contagious disease, and the Smiths were patient zero. I watched my father from my secluded corner. Richard stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping on the spilled scotch soaking into the patterned carpet. He collided with the edge of the round dining table, his hands flying up to grip the fabric of his tailored suit jacket. He clutched his chest right over his heart. For a fleeting second, I wondered if the shock had triggered a cardiac event, but as I studied his pale, sweating face, I recognized the true nature of his collapse. His chest tightened, not from failing arteries, but from profound, unmitigated social mortification. His entire identity rested on the approval of the men currently marching out the exit. His golf companions averted their eyes, striding past his table without offering a single glance of recognition. His reputation evaporated into the air-conditioned breeze. Near the wooden podium, the illusion of the happy tech couple disintegrated into an ugly public spectacle. Vanessa remained on the polished marble tile, her broken designer stiletto discarded nearby. The shock of her fall faded, replaced by the terrifying realization of the final slide, the foreclosure notice. The pristine luxury image she curated for her social media followers was a hollow shell resting over a repossessed foundation. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her twisted ankle. Her carefully styled hair fell in messy strands across her face. She lunged toward Daniel, her manicured hands curling into fists. "Where is the house money, Daniel?" Her voice was shrill, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. The sound sliced through the remaining murmurs in the room. "You told me the mortgage was set up on an automatic draft. You told me the seed funding covered our personal overhead. We are losing our home." Daniel backed away from her, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. He darted his eyes around the emptying ballroom, still prioritizing his public image over his furious wife. "Keep your voice down, Vanessa." He hissed the words through clenched teeth, his face flushed and angry, mottled crimson. "We can fix this. It is just a temporary banking error. I can explain everything if you just stop screaming."
"You forged a loan document." She shrieked, striking his chest with her open palms. "You stole $40,000 and we are still getting evicted. I am wearing a stolen watch." The few lingering guests paused near the exit, turning their heads to witness the final collapse of the golden child. Daniel flinched, realizing his persuasive charm held zero currency in the face of raw, documented evidence. He had no spin left. He had no fictional venture capitalists to save him. Patricia could not fix the scene unfolding on the stage. She could not stop the exodus of the wealthy investors, and she could not mend Richard's shattered pride. True to the ingrained patterns of my childhood, she sought out the easiest target to absorb her rising panic. She needed a scapegoat to carry the blame for the explosion. She locked her eyes on my audio-visual table and marched across the room. Her floral evening gown swished angrily around her ankles. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, untethered rage. She stopped 2 feet from my folding table, her chest heaving, her hands trembling at her sides. "Turn it back on," she demanded, her voice a low, venomous growl. "Turn that projector back on right this instant and put the logo up. You need to get on that microphone and tell everyone it was a joke. Tell them you fabricated those documents because you were jealous of your brother." I methodically coiled the thick black display cable, securing it with a small Velcro strap. I placed the cord into the designated pocket of my laptop bag. I did not look up from my task. I did not rush my movements. "There is no joke to explain, Mom," I replied, my tone flat and even. "The bank ledger is real. The foreclosure is real. Your forged signature is a matter of public record. Putting a graphic design back on the wall will not change the balance of your checking account." "You are a monster," Patricia spat, leaning over the table, her eyes wide with desperate fury. "You destroyed your own family. You humiliated your father in front of his peers. You ruined your brother on the most important night of his career. You planned this whole vicious charade just to punish us for your catering budget. You are selfish and cruel." I zipped the main compartment of my bag. I hoisted the heavy strap over my shoulder and finally lifted my gaze to meet hers. I looked at the woman who had demanded I surrender my wedding savings to shield her from the consequences of her own enabling. I felt no anger. I felt no lingering desire for her approval. The emotional cavity she used to manipulate me was filled with cold, impenetrable concrete. "I did not ruin him," I said, maintaining steady eye contact. "I just showed you the math." Before Patricia could draw breath for another frantic accusation, a tall figure stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen corridor. Liam materialized at my side. He had not sat at the family table during the dinner. He had waited near the perimeter, observing the room, acting as a silent sentinel. He stepped between Patricia and me, his broad shoulders creating an impassable physical barrier. He did not offer Patricia a greeting. He did not engage in the argument. He simply placed a firm, grounding hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the side exit. His silence delivered a louder condemnation than any shouted insult. It communicated that the Smith family no longer held any jurisdiction over my life. We walked out of the grand ballroom together. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the sounds of Vanessa's continued screaming and the frantic, hushed arguments of the country club staff. The thick, patterned carpet of the hallway absorbed our footsteps. We navigated the winding corridors of the elite establishment, passing original oil paintings and polished antique sideboards, leaving the toxic wreckage of my bloodline in our wake. We emerged through the front portico into the humid Texas night. The air felt heavy, yet entirely breathable. The suffocating pressure of my childhood lifted from my shoulders, floating away into the dark sky. The valet attendant brought our sedan around the circular driveway, handing Liam the keys with a polite nod. I slid into the passenger seat, dropping my laptop bag onto the floorboard. The leather seat felt cool against my back. Liam climbed behind the steering wheel, his profile illuminated by the amber glow of the dashboard instruments. He reached over the center console, interlacing his fingers with mine.
A quiet, profound peace settled in the cabin of the car. The detonation was successful. The battlefield was cleared. I was finally free to walk down the aisle in 2 days without the shadow of Daniel's fabricated empire darkening my path. Liam pushed the ignition button. The engine purred to life, sending a gentle vibration through the chassis. He shifted the gear selector into drive, his foot hovering over the accelerator pedal. Suddenly, a sharp electronic chime shattered the quiet atmosphere inside the vehicle. The sound originated from the digital infotainment screen mounted in the center console. The Bluetooth system registered an incoming phone call, pausing the soft background music we had set for the drive home. The caller identification displayed a 10-digit number originating from the local area code, but the name field remained blank. Liam frowned, glancing at the glowing digits. He rarely received phone calls at this hour, especially from unrecognized numbers. He tapped the green acceptance icon on the touchscreen, putting the audio on the vehicle speaker system. "Hello," Liam said, keeping his eyes on the paved driveway ahead. "Mr. Hayes," a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the car speakers. The tone was professional, rigid, and carried the unmistakable cadence of law enforcement. "Speaking," Liam replied, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "My name is Detective Miller," the voice stated, leaving no room for casual pleasantries. "I am an investigator with the Financial Fraud Division of the Texas State Authorities. I am calling regarding the identity theft report you filed 3 days ago concerning an unauthorized commercial credit application. We received the physical dossier you mailed to our department yesterday morning. I need to speak with you and Alina Smith immediately. We are preparing to issue a warrant." 2 days after the country club detonation, Saturday morning dawned with a clear, pale blue sky. The air in my apartment felt remarkably light, swept clean of the suffocating humidity that defined the previous 48 hours. I sat in front of my vanity mirror, pinning my hair into a sleek twist. No bridal entourage crowded my bedroom. No frantic mother hovered over my shoulder, dictating lipstick shades or adjusting my veil. I embraced the quiet solitude. It was the sound of true independence. My cell phone vibrated against the wooden surface of the vanity. The screen illuminated, displaying a missed call notification, followed instantly by the icon for a new voicemail. The caller identification registered my mother's cellular number. For a fraction of a second, the phantom reflex of my childhood kicked in, the ingrained urge to answer, to fix whatever crisis Patricia was experiencing, twitched in my fingertips. I stared at the digital playback button. She was likely calling to beg for a retraction, to scream about the financial crimes detective, or to demand I bail Daniel out of his impending arrest. I dragged my finger across the glass screen and tapped the red trash can icon. The audio file vanished into the digital void unheard. The lingering ghost of the family scapegoat evaporated with it. Our wedding did not take place in a grand ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers. Liam and I secured a refurbished industrial loft on the edge of downtown Dallas. The space featured exposed brick walls, raw steel beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the hardwood floors in natural sunlight. It was honest architecture. Nothing was hidden behind layers of imported silk or fake gold foil. We paid for every vendor in physical currency, securing our celebration against any digital interference. I arrived at the venue 2 hours before the ceremony. The replacement floral designer we hired at the last minute had exceeded my expectations. Instead of the expensive imported white blooms Vanessa tried to steal, our new vendor utilized local Texas wildflowers, vibrant sunflowers, and lush greenery. The arrangements breathed life into the industrial space, filling the room with a rich, earthy fragrance that grounded my racing thoughts. The seating arrangement provided the most profound visual contrast to Thursday night. The rental company delivered simple wooden folding chairs. They were slightly mismatched, carrying small scuffs from years of honest use. They lacked the gilded mahogany polish of the country club furniture. However, as the clock struck 4 in the afternoon, every single one of those modest chairs held a guest. There were no empty spaces near the front. Our friends, Liam's extended relatives, and my trusted colleagues filled the room with genuine warmth. They were not there to network or evaluate our net worth. They showed up to celebrate a partnership built on mutual respect.
When the string duo began playing the processional melody, I did not wait at the back of the aisle for my father. Richard lost the privilege of giving me away the moment he asked me to co-sign a fraudulent loan to cover his tracks. I walked down the aisle alone, my shoulders pulled back, my vision locked entirely on Liam. He stood at the altar wearing a sharp, tailored suit, his eyes shining with a quiet, fierce devotion. With every step I took across the polished hardwood, the invisible chains of my upbringing fractured and fell away. The burden of being the backup child, the human safety net for a brother who despised me, lifted permanently from my chest. I felt weightless. The ceremony was brief, focusing on authentic promises rather than performative traditions. We exchanged rings, sealed our vows, and turned to face our guests as a legally bound team. The applause that followed was not the polite, hollow clapping of wealthy investors. It was loud, chaotic, and brimming with authentic joy. The transition into the reception flowed seamlessly. The catering staff paid in full with the cash we withdrew earlier in the week, served a phenomenal meal of braised short ribs and roasted root vegetables. No one complained about the lack of caviar. No one checked their designer watches or sneered at the rustic table settings. The air conditioning hummed, keeping the Texas heat at bay, while the jazz band transitioned into lively, upbeat rhythms. I sat at the sweetheart table with Liam, sipping a glass of Prosecco. I looked across the room, watching my friends laugh and trade stories over their meals. A profound, unfamiliar peace settled into my bones. For my entire life, family gatherings meant navigating a minefield of passive-aggressive comments, measuring my worth against Daniel's fabricated achievements, and shrinking myself to avoid triggering Richard's temper. Tonight, my environment contained zero drama. The toxic elements were surgically removed, leaving only a pure, untainted celebration of the life I chose to build alongside a man who actually valued my intellect. As the dinner service concluded, the band announced the opening of the dance floor. Liam stood up, offering his hand to lead me toward the center of the room. Before we could take 3 steps, his best man, David, intercepted us. David was a senior risk analyst who worked alongside Liam at the logistics firm. He possessed a sharp, analytical mind and rarely displayed outward emotion. Tonight, however, his eyes were wide, and a tight, suppressed smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He held his smartphone tightly in his right hand. Liam, David murmured, leaning in close to ensure the jazz music masked his words from the surrounding tables. "I am sorry to interrupt your evening, but you need to see this right now." Liam frowned, his protective instincts instantly flaring. "Is everything all right with the venue?" "The venue is perfect," David replied, tapping the screen of his device to wake it up. He turned the phone toward us, displaying a live feed from a prominent Austin news network. "But I cannot say the same for your brother-in-law's commercial real estate." I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto the glowing screen. The news camera broadcasted a live, unstable shot from the sidewalk outside the premium Congress Avenue office building. The evening sun cast long shadows across the polished glass exterior. The scene outside Daniel's supposed corporate headquarters was a theater of legal reckoning. 3 black utility vehicles belonging to the Texas state authorities blocked the loading zone. A team of investigators wearing tactical vests with federal insignia emblazoned across the back were actively carrying heavy cardboard boxes out of the revolving glass doors. The news ticker scrolling across the bottom of the broadcast delivered the final devastating blow. State and federal task force raids downtown Austin tech startup amidst allegations of severe wire fraud and commercial identity theft. I watched as 2 officers wheeled a metal cart loaded with computer servers and filing cabinets out of the lobby. The empty shell game was officially over. The detective who called Liam outside the country club had not wasted a single minute. The digital ledger we built, combined with the rejected credit application and the forged lease documents, provided the authorities with enough probable cause to execute a swift, uncompromising raid. David lowered the phone, slipping it back into his suit pocket. "I set a news alert for his company name after you told me about the credit inquiry," he explained quietly. "They hit the building about 20 minutes ago. The anchor mentioned they are currently serving warrants at multiple residential addresses in the area." Residential addresses. The police were heading to the house Daniel and Vanessa were losing to foreclosure. The law was actively dismantling the last remaining pillars of their gilded illusion. Liam wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. He looked down at me, searching my face for any sign of residual grief or familial regret. He found none. "Are you okay?" he asked, softly. I looked away from the space where the phone had been and scanned my reception. The dance floor was filling up. My colleagues were laughing near the open bar. The rustic wooden chairs stood empty as guests celebrated our union. The contrast was poetic and absolute. My brother was currently facing a federal raid in a hollow, barren office space, while I stood in a room overflowing with genuine love and paid-off invoices. "I have never been better," I answered, turning my attention back to my husband. The band struck up an upbeat tempo. We walked onto the dance floor, leaving the wreckage of the past to the authorities, and began the first dance of our new, unburdened reality. The Texas winter brought a sharp, biting chill to the Dallas Metroplex. 6 months passed since the night the projector screen went black in the country club ballroom. The chaotic fallout of that evening transitioned into a quiet, predictable rhythm. Liam and I moved into a modest, single-story brick house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We held the deed. We paid the mortgage on time every month, using funds earned through honest labor. The walls contained no secrets. The air inside our home felt remarkably light. The peace of our new daily routine was occasionally punctuated by scheduled phone calls from Detective Miller. The Financial Fraud Division spent the autumn methodically dismantling the hollow framework of Austin Venture, LLC. The wheels of the federal justice system turn slowly, but they grind with an unforgiving mechanical precision. The investigators subpoenaed bank records, seized hard drives, and tracked every stolen dollar across multiple state lines. On a dreary Tuesday afternoon, Detective Miller requested a final in-person meeting at his downtown precinct. Liam and I navigated the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors and sat across from his scarred metal desk. Miller opened a thick manila folder. He bypassed the bank ledgers and pulled out a printed copy of the blank loan application my father sent me months ago. The fabricated home improvement loan Richard claimed he needed for a leaking roof. I had saved that unsigned digital document to my encrypted hard drive on the night he tried to guilt me into co-signing. I turned the digital file over to the authorities during our initial interview, considering it a minor piece of the harassment puzzle. Miller pointed a silver pen at the bottom of the page. He drew my attention to the circular notary seal stamped next to the primary signature line. The Forensic Digital Laboratory analyzed the metadata of this specific document. Miller explained, his voice low and professional. The notary stamp is a forgery, but it is not a unique forgery. We ran the pixelation patterns and the software footprint through our database. It is an exact, identical duplicate of the counterfeit notary seal used on the commercial lease agreement for your brother's office suite in Austin. The air in the interrogation room turned frigid. The implication settled over my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. My father was not just a naive victim caught in the crossfire of his son's blind ambition. Richard was an active, willing participant in the cover-up. He knew Daniel was running a fraudulent enterprise. He knew the home equity cash was gone. Rather than face the humiliation of bankruptcy, my father manufactured fake home repair documents. He utilized his son's counterfeit notary seal to trap me in their debt pool, hoping my pristine credit score would buy them a few more weeks of luxury. The ultimate betrayal was not that he favored Daniel. The betrayal was that Richard viewed me as disposable collateral. The revelation severed the final fraying thread of daughterly obligation I harbored. The truth set a cold, logical chain of events into motion. The district attorney indicted Daniel on multiple felony counts of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The polished charm that served him so well at family dinners held zero currency in a federal courtroom. The presiding judge reviewed Daniel's history of forging signatures and utilizing stolen Social Security numbers. Determining he was a severe flight risk who might attempt to flee the jurisdiction, the judge firmly denied bail. The golden child,
the self-proclaimed visionary tech executive, traded his tailored navy blazers for a standard county-issued uniform. He sat in a cinder-block holding cell eating cafeteria food, awaiting a trial that carried a mandatory minimum prison sentence. The systemic consequences cascaded downward, striking my parents with equal severity. The banking institution holding the staggering home equity line of credit did not care about family pride or country club reputations. They operated on strict algorithms and missed payment triggers. When the account defaulted beyond the grace period, the bank executed their contractual right to foreclose. The suburban split-level home, the house where I grew up, was sold at a public auction on the stone steps of the Dallas County Courthouse. Richard and Patricia packed 30 years of accumulated possessions into rented cardboard boxes. Stripped of their retirement funds and their equity, they relocated to a cramped ground-floor apartment in a dilapidated complex adjacent to the interstate. They traded their quiet, tree-lined street for the constant roaring hum of 18-wheelers driving past their single-bedroom window. The country club formally revoked Richard's membership due to unpaid dues and the lingering stench of public scandal. There were no more prime rib dinners or golf tournaments. Their daily reality shrank to the size of a linoleum kitchen floor. Vanessa experienced her own brutal reckoning. The illusion of the billionaire wife shattered the moment the federal agents carried the computer servers out of the Austin office building. She realized the designer wardrobe and the luxury vehicles were financed by stolen money. The authorities seized their shared bank accounts, freezing every asset tied to the fraudulent enterprise. Last month, David traveled to Austin for a corporate logistics conference. While walking back to his hotel, he passed a high-end pawn shop on a gritty side street. He stopped, recognizing a familiar figure through the reinforced glass window. Vanessa stood at the worn glass counter. She was not wearing her customary silk dresses or designer sunglasses. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. David watched as she unclasped the gold and stainless steel Cartier watch from her wrist. The pawnbroker screwed a magnifying loupe into his eye, inspecting the links before sliding a stack of worn $100 bills across the counter. Vanessa traded the ultimate symbol of her fake wealth for a fraction of its retail value in untraceable cash. She used the pawnshop money to retain a ruthless divorce attorney. She filed the legal paperwork citing irreconcilable differences and fled back to her parents' spare bedroom in a neighboring suburb. She abandoned the Smith family's sinking ship the moment the water breached the hull, leaving Daniel to face the federal prosecutors alone. The toxic ecosystem that defined my entire existence was eradicated. The law provided a clinical, uncompromising resolution. I focused on building my new operations consulting firm, utilizing my forensic auditing skills to help legitimate businesses streamline their supply chains. The revenue was honest, the growth was steady. On a quiet Saturday morning, I walked down the driveway to retrieve the mail from our brass mailbox. The crisp Texas breeze carried the faint scent of pine. I sifted through the stack of utility bills and grocery store circulars while walking back to the front porch. Nestled in the center of the stack was a thin, cheap, white envelope. It lacked a printed return address label. The destination was written in a jagged, hurried script I recognized instantly from a lifetime of birthday cards and forged loan documents. I tore the paper flap open. A single sheet of ruled notebook paper slid into my palm. The letter contained only 4 sentences penned in blue ink by a man who had lost everything to his own arrogance. Richard was writing to request a small, short-term loan to secure the services of a bankruptcy lawyer. I stood on the concrete walkway of my front yard, the thin white envelope resting in my palm. The Texas morning sun warmed the skin of my arms, but the piece of paper felt cold and heavy. I had pulled the single sheet of ruled notebook paper from its casing just moments ago. My eyes had grazed the opening sentence, absorbing my father's desperate plea for a short-term loan to secure a bankruptcy attorney. I did not need to read the second sentence. I knew the exact anatomy of the paragraphs that followed. There would be hollow apologies, carefully crafted guilt trips, and a reminder of all the sacrifices he supposedly made during my childhood to justify his current demands. I folded the notebook paper back into its original crease. I tucked it inside the cheap envelope. I walked up the 3 front steps, opened the solid oak door, and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my own home. I walked straight down the hallway toward my home office. The hardwood floor felt solid beneath my bare feet. There were no ghosts in this house. There were no echoes of shattered stained glass windows or hushed arguments over unpaid bills. I approached the heavy black shredder positioned next to my wooden desk. I slid the power switch to the active position. The internal motor hummed to life, producing a low, steady vibration. I held the envelope over the feeding slot. I did not pause to consider the alternative. There would be no tearful reunion in a sterile attorney waiting room. There would be no dramatic reconciliation where my parents finally recognized my worth. Forgiving a betrayal of that magnitude would only invite the poison back into my ecosystem. I dropped the unread pages into the machine. The steel blades caught the paper, pulling it downward with a sharp, grinding noise. The letter dissolved into hundreds of illegible strips, falling into the dark plastic bin below. I pressed the power switch off. The silence that followed was crisp and permanent. The final string was cut. I turned my attention to the center of my desk. A thick, textured parchment document rested on the leather blotter. It was not a forged lease agreement or a counterfeit bank loan. It was a certified business registration from the Texas Secretary of State. When the financial fraud detective utilized my digital ledger to dismantle my brother's shell company, a profound realization took root in my mind. The forensic auditing skills I honed during that weekend of building evidence against my own bloodline were highly valuable in the corporate sector. I possessed a unique talent for identifying supply chain vulnerabilities, tracking hidden expenditures, and exposing structural inefficiencies. I resigned from my corporate logistics job 3 months ago. I took my accumulated savings, researched the market demand, and filed the necessary paperwork to launch my own independent firm. I picked up a solid mahogany frame resting on the corner of the desk. I removed the heavy glass pane carefully, placed my official limited liability company certificate against the velvet backing, and secured the metal clips. I flipped the frame over. The printed letters stared back at me, crisp and authoritative. Smith Operations Consulting. I carried the heavy wooden frame toward the far wall of the office. A metal nail already protruded from the painted drywall, waiting for its designated burden. I hung the certificate, stepping back to adjust the alignment until the wooden edge sat perfectly parallel to the floorboards. The afternoon light spilled through the window blinds, illuminating the gold foil seal stamped in the bottom corner of the document. The visual contrast brought a quiet, genuine smile to my face. Daniel spent his entire adult life projecting a false image of corporate dominance. He leased empty glass rooms and printed embossed business cards for a company that generated zero revenue. He built a towering monument to deception, requiring constant, frantic theft to maintain the fragile illusion. My company operated under a different philosophy entirely. I started with a single laptop at my kitchen island. I secured local freight companies as my initial clients, offering them rigorous, honest audits of their operational logistics. I tracked missing inventory, eliminated phantom billing practices, and reorganized their shipping routes. I delivered tangible, mathematical results. The foundation of my enterprise rested on verifiable data, honest labor, and earned trust. I picked up my digital tablet from the desk, tapping the screen to unlock the financial dashboard. I walked out of the home office, traversing the living room, and pushed open the back door. Liam sat on our covered patio, relaxing in a woven wicker chair. A tall glass of iced tea rested on the small iron table beside him. The backyard stretched out before us, enclosed by a sturdy wooden fence. We owned every blade of grass, every brick, and every wooden plank. We financed this quiet life through disciplined savings and transparent transactions. I took the empty chair next to him, crossing my legs and settling into the comfortable cushions. Liam looked over, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Did the mail arrive?" he asked, taking a slow sip of his iced drink. "Just junk mail," I replied, my voice steady and truthful. I shredded it.
Liam nodded, accepting the answer without requiring further details. He understood the boundaries I established. He respected the concrete wall I built between our peaceful present and the chaotic wreckage of my past. I tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing up the quarterly profit and loss statement for my consulting firm. I angled the device so Liam could see the neat, organized columns of numbers. The initial quarter closed yesterday, I announced, tracing the final bottom line figure with my index finger. The numbers are finalized. We secured 3 new regional freight contracts last month. The operational audits we performed for the Dallas Distribution Center saved them enough overhead to guarantee our retainer for the next fiscal year. Liam leaned closer, his eyes scanning the green digits indicating our net profit. The total was substantial. It was not a fabricated seed round from a ghost venture capitalist. It was earned currency, deposited securely into a legitimate commercial checking account. "You built something incredible, Alina," he murmured, reaching across the space between our chairs to cover my hand with his own. His grip was warm and grounding. "You took the worst experience of your life and weaponized your own competence to secure our future." I looked out at the evening sun dipping below the horizon. The sky shifted into deep shades of orange and violet. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant sound of a lawnmower and the gentle rustle of the wind through the oak trees. I thought about the crumbling shortbread cookies on the sticky vinyl tablecloth. I remembered the tearful, manipulative speeches about fixed incomes and pension cuts. I recalled the terror in my mother's eyes when she realized her forged signature would bankrupt her, and the cold, unyielding arrogance of my brother as he threatened to destroy the career of the man sitting next to me. They operated on a fundamental misunderstanding of the world. They believed success was a commodity you could steal, forge, or inherit through blind favoritism. They assumed the truth was flexible, easily bent to serve their selfish narratives. Their deception cost them their freedom, their home, and their social standing. The universe eventually balances the ledger, and the math is always unforgiving. I broke the cycle. I established the ultimate perimeter around my life. I learned that enforcing a boundary does not require a dramatic confrontation or a public screaming match. True protection involves silent, decisive action. It involves hanging up the phone, walking away from the country club ballroom, and dropping the toxic letters directly into the steel blades of a shredder. I leaned my head back against the wicker chair, breathing in the fresh scent of the evening air. The tension that resided in my shoulders for 3 decades was permanently eradicated. I did not need their validation to secure my legacy. I built my own infrastructure. They told me they had nothing left for my wedding. They were right, but they gave me exactly what I needed to build my own life: the truth. We often think of family as an impenetrable sanctuary, a safe harbor built from the sturdy timber of unconditional love and shared history. But what happens when the architects of that sanctuary, the parents, begin to rot the wood from the inside out? The story of Alina and her family is more than just a dramatic tale of financial ruin, forged documents, and a perfectly executed digital exposure. It is a profound cautionary reflection on the devastating consequences of failed parenting. It forces us to examine warped family responsibilities and the long-term emotional damage inflicted when fundamental fairness is abandoned in favor of blind favoritism. In the heart of American culture, we hold tight to the ideals of the self-made individual, the value of hard work, and the sanctity of the traditional family structure. We teach our children that honesty is the absolute bedrock of character, and that personal responsibility is the price of admission to adulthood. Yet, in the quiet, private corners of suburban homes, a different, far more toxic curriculum is sometimes taught. Richard and Patricia did not set out to destroy their family with malicious intent. Like many parents who fall into the treacherous trap of the golden child dynamic, they likely believed they were acting out of love. They saw Daniel's ambition and tragically mistook his arrogance for potential. They saw his repeated failures and mistook them for temporary setbacks that just needed a little more padding, a little more financial cushioning, and a few more lies to cover the gap. But true family responsibility is never about shielding a child from the natural consequences of their actions. It is about guiding them through the uncomfortable,
necessary fires of accountability. When a parent continually steps in to erase a child's mistakes, whether it is taking the blame for a shattered stained glass window at age 12 or bailing out a failing commercial lease at age 30, they are not protecting the child. They are actively crippling them. They are teaching that child that the rules of gravity do not apply, that they can jump from any height and someone else will always be forced to catch them. In Daniel's case, his parents' blind enabling did not turn him into the visionary tech titan he pretended to be. It turned him into a desperate, hollow fraud, a man so disconnected from reality that he was willing to commit federal identity theft against his own future brother-in-law simply to keep up appearances. On the opposite side of this destructive dynamic stood Alina, the quintessential reliable child. In traditional family structures where emotional awareness is severely lacking, the capable, independent child is rarely celebrated for their strength. Instead, they are commodified. They are transformed from a beloved daughter into a human safety net. Alina's story highlights a tragic blind spot in many households, the deeply flawed assumption that the child who demands the least requires the least amount of love and protection. Alina did everything according to the prescribed script of the American dream. She earned her academic scholarships, budgeted her operations manager salary to the exact penny, and built a stable, honest life with a partner who genuinely respected her. Yet her parents viewed her stability not as a triumph to be celebrated, but as a boundless resource to be harvested. They expected her to absorb the financial and emotional blows generated by her brother's recklessness. They demanded she downsize her own wedding, a milestone she financed entirely through her own labor, to bail out a sibling who was actively attempting to sabotage her joy. This is the insidious, quiet violence of conditional love. When a parent lacks the emotional awareness to see their children as distinct individuals rather than extensions of their own egos, they inevitably fracture the sibling bond, replacing mutual support with bitter, silent resentment. Raising children requires an unwavering daily commitment to fairness and honesty. Fairness does not necessarily mean treating every child exactly the same, but it does mean applying the exact same standards of morality, integrity, and accountability across the board. When Richard and Patricia conspired to hide the $40,000 wire transfer, when they weaponized a false narrative of poverty to manipulate Alina into paying for her own family's basic social obligations, they crossed a definitive line from poor parenting into active betrayal. They taught their children that deception is a perfectly acceptable tool for maintaining a social facade. They modeled a toxic version of loyalty where the truth is readily sacrificed on the altar of public perception and country club prestige. The fallout of this deception is staggering, and it serves as a stark reminder of what is truly at stake when parenting values degrade. A family is not held together by massive home equity loans, exclusive golf memberships, or the performative wealth displayed at high society galas. It is held together by trust. When that trust is repeatedly violated, the foundation inevitably collapses under its own weight. Richard and Patricia lost their suburban home, their social standing, and their freedom to live peacefully in their retirement. Daniel lost his liberty, his marriage, and his future. But the most profound, irreversible loss was the permanent severance of their daughter. Alina's ultimate triumph was not merely the brilliant forensic exposure of her brother's crimes in front of the Texas elite. It was her profound realization that she possessed the power to break the cycle. She refused to pass down the generational trauma of manipulation and conditional worth. By walking out of that grand ballroom and later shredding the final desperate letter from her father, she drew an impenetrable boundary around her new life. She chose to build her future on the solid bedrock of honesty, choosing a partner who valued transparency and building a consulting business rooted in legitimate, verifiable hard work. Stories like Alina's resonate so deeply with us because they strip away the polished veneer of the perfect American family and force us to look at the raw, sometimes ugly truth underneath the floorboards. They ask us to rigorously examine the dynamics within our own homes. Are we cultivating environments of true emotional honesty, Or are we quietly enabling destructive behaviors just to avoid difficult conversations? Are we celebrating our children for who they truly are? Or are we molding them to fit a narrative that makes us look better to the outside world? If you found yourself nodding along to Alina's journey, if you have ever felt like the reliable backbone of a family that only seems to notice you when they need something to lean on, you are not alone. There is an entire community of us out here navigating the complex, often painful realities of family dynamics and doing the hard work of reclaiming our own narratives. Take a moment to subscribe to the Linda Vengeance channel, where we continue to explore stories of resilience, unyielding boundaries, and the quiet, extraordinary power of walking away from toxic expectations. As we reflect on the shattered remnants of the Smith family's facade, we are left with a lingering, uncomfortable question that echoes long after the projector screen goes dark. When we look at the children we are raising, the siblings we are supporting, or the parents we are desperately trying to please, what kind of foundation are we truly building? Are we laying heavy bricks of honesty that can withstand the brutal storms of reality? Or are we simply painting over a hollow, rotting frame, hoping the world never leans too hard against the walls? Perhaps the answer isn't found in the grand public moments of our lives, but in the quiet, unseen choices we make when we think no one is watching. And perhaps deep down, as we lock our own doors at night, we already know exactly what our houses are made of.